The coffee was still warm when Elena Ward vanished in the lakeside residential area of Pushaw, Bangor, Maine. Population 31,240. On the night of December 14, 2005, a snowstorm swept through Penobscot County, leaving nearly 9 inches of snow blanketing the wooden roofs and driveways around the lake. At 9:47 p.m., Elena's neighbor, Mrs. Harriet Cole, saw the 32-year-old elementary school teacher standing by the kitchen window, holding a white ceramic mug with a blue rim, the golden light reflecting off the thick snow on the porch. That was the last time anyone saw her. The next morning, the mug was still on the table, her Lexus remained in the garage, her phone and keys were in their usual places, and there wasn't a single footprint in the snow on the porch. What happened in the following 47 minutes would haunt Bangor for the next 14 years. Before we dive deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. The winter of 2005 blanketed Bangor, Maine, with heavy snow and biting cold that slowed every movement in the small town. In such harsh weather conditions, the morning of December 15th began with an unusual silence at Elena Ward's home on Pushaw Road. Normally, around 7 a.m., Elena would call her sister to remind her to prepare to take their mother to a doctor's appointment, or at the very least, send a short message letting her know she was awake. But that day, the phone remained silent. The family tried calling several more times, and every call went straight to voicemail. Something Elena never allowed to happen, because her job required her to stay constantly reachable. Concern grew when Elena's sister decided to drive over to check on her. She knocked on the door multiple times, but received no response. The front door was locked, the back door was locked, and there were no signs of anyone leaving in a hurry or anything unusual. Elena's car was still parked in the garage. Inside the house, the living room lights were off, the curtains were still drawn, revealing no indication that the homeowner had left since the previous evening. The strange feeling gradually turned into unease when Lucas Ward, Elena's husband, appeared from upstairs after hearing the calls. He stated that Elena had gone out for a walk at dawn, around nearly 5 a.m., saying she wanted to get some fresh cold air and would be back soon. The answer puzzled everyone. The weather that day was brutal, with temperatures below 10 degrees Fahrenheit, strong winds, and thick falling snow, making walking nearly impossible. Especially for Elena, a cautious person who never left the house without her phone or a heavy coat. Nevertheless, Lucas insisted he saw nothing unusual and suggested that Elena might have walked along the woods behind the house and lost cell service. The family realized this explanation didn't match Elena's habits or the weather conditions. They continued calling, checking voicemail, and trying to reach her close friends. But no one had seen or heard from Elena since the previous evening. Elena's complete loss of contact for many hours created an information gap too large to ignore. After checking the entire area around the house and confirming there were no fresh footprints in the snow, the family concluded this was no longer a normal delay or a spontaneous walk. Finally, after considering the full situation, the phone off since the night before, the car still in the garage, no signs of preparation to leave, and weather conditions completely unsuitable for going out at dawn, the family had no choice but to face the possibility that something abnormal had happened to Elena. With no reason left to delay, they called the Bangor Police Department to report her missing. Less than 10 minutes later, just before 9 a.m., the call was received and classified as a welfare check, accurately reflecting the situation the family described. Unusual, but not yet confirmed to involve criminal elements. A patrol unit was immediately dispatched to the Ward residence on Pushaw Road for an initial welfare check. Upon arrival, officers noted the scene matched the report. The victim's vehicle was still in the garage, and no movement or signs of activity could be observed through the windows. The patrol unit knocked multiple times. Lucas Ward appeared and opened the door, appearing cooperative and immediately inviting the officers inside. The welfare check began on the ground floor. Initial observations were recorded. Both front and back doors were locked from the inside. The living room was tidy with no signs of items being disturbed. The kitchen showed no evidence of use that morning. Notably, a small ground floor window was open a few inches, inconsistent with Bangor's cold and windy morning weather. However, the floor beneath the window had no snow accumulation or meltwater marks, suggesting the window had been opened earlier or opened without leaving traces. The patrol unit continued upstairs. The main bedroom shared by Elena and Lucas was tidy, with bedding not noticeably disturbed, but no way to determine when it was last used. There were no scattered items, no signs of a struggle, and certainly no evidence of forced entry through windows or the balcony door. Officers checked all locks and door frames. Everything remained intact. A small adjacent study showed papers left in order, with no open computer or hastily pulled documents. Lucas agreed to let police check all remaining rooms, including the guest living area, laundry room, and basement. In the basement, personal items and household goods were in their proper places, with no signs of recent rushed cleaning or repairs. All exterior basement doors were locked and showed no signs of being forced. After a comprehensive review, police determined there were no signs of external forced entry, no scene of a struggle, and no direct evidence of criminal activity inside the house. However, the complete absence of any trace of Elena leaving the home, from shoes to coat, combined with the phone being inactive since the previous night, led police to classify the situation as medium risk rather than a routine missing person case. Lucas reiterated that Elena had gone out walking at dawn, and the patrol unit requested precise details, exact time, intended direction, clothing worn, and morning routine. Although Lucas was cooperative, his answers provided no significant additional data to determine Elena's likely path or the plausibility of her leaving voluntarily. Police noted in the report that there were no signs of deliberate departure, no clear evidence the victim left on foot, and the surrounding environment showed no disturbed snow. At the conclusion of the welfare check, the Ward residence was recorded as no immediate danger indicators but high risk of missing person, and an official case file was opened for Elena Ward's disappearance. Upon completing the initial welfare check, the patrol unit proceeded to the critical information gathering phase to help reconstruct the timeline of Elena Ward's disappearance. They began with Lucas, identified as the last person present in the house with Elena. In his initial statement, Lucas described the events of the evening before his wife vanished. Both were home from around 6 p.m., had a simple dinner, watched television, and went upstairs to the bedroom around 9 p.m. He claimed Elena went to sleep earlier than he did, but could not specify exactly when she fell asleep. When asked about the last time he saw her awake, Lucas only said he remembered her turning over around 10 p.m., but could not describe any particular sound or behavior. When asked to precisely describe when Elena left the house, Lucas maintained his earlier statement. He woke up around nearly 5 a.m., noticed the bed beside him empty, assumed his wife had gone for a short walk and would return soon. He heard no door open, did not know what she was wearing, and could not explain why Elena would leave without her phone, wallet, or heavy coat. Police recorded all details without judging truthfulness, focusing only on timestamps that could be cross-referenced with other data. After taking Lucas's statement, police spoke with Elena's family, who could provide a more consistent picture of her daily routine. The family confirmed that Elena always maintained the habit of morning communication, especially on cold days. She never went walking outside when temperatures dropped below freezing unless there was a clear reason or she was with someone else. The family also stated that Elena did not have a habit of waking up around 5 a.m., much less leaving the house without prior notice. Elena's sister asserted if Elena intended to go for a walk or morning exercise, she always brought her phone to listen to music. Another key detail provided by the family was that Elena had no appointments or plans for the morning of December 15th, making any departure completely inconsistent with her schedule. These facts helped police identify which behaviors were normal and which deviated from the victim's established pattern. To corroborate the last possible sighting of Elena, police knocked on the 3 nearest houses to gather information from neighbors. The household, 1 house away, reported hearing an unusual sound around 10 p.m., something like an object lightly hitting the wall or furniture being moved, but not loud enough to hold their attention for long. They saw no lights turned on in the Ward house after that time. The house directly across reported that around 9 p.m., the Ward living room lights were still on by 10 p.m. They were completely off and never came back on. They observed no movement in the front yard or street throughout the night, largely due to heavy snowfall and limited visibility. Another neighbor at a nearby intersection stated they saw no pedestrians that morning, even at 5 or 6 a.m. when they opened the door for their dog, and emphasized that in such bad weather, it was extremely rare for anyone to walk alone. Police compiled all statements into a raw dataset. Time of lights going out, the 10 p.m. noise, Elena's personal habits, the timeline provided by Lucas, and the fact that no one saw the victim leave the house. They excluded no detail, no matter how small, as everything could potentially connect when reconstructing the sequence of events. A timeline chart began to take shape, including approximate times of the last activities inside the house, the point at which the victim became unreachable, and the moment Lucas discovered the empty bed. Each piece of data was marked by certainty level, high, medium, or low, based on the source. This separation laid a solid foundation for the next step, building a verifiable event timeline. Based on the initial information, police made no conclusions yet, completing only the baseline data collection phase and preparing for the subsequent analysis stage of the Elena Ward missing person case. After completing the initial statement collection, the investigative team began the phase of constructing a preliminary timeline for the entire sequence of events related to Elena Ward's disappearance. Their goal was to establish each time point from the afternoon of December 14th to the morning of December 15th, based on information from the family, Lucas Ward's statements, observations from neighbors, and any verifiable environmental data they could obtain. The process started by identifying the earliest confirmable time point, around 5:45 p.m. on December 14th. A family member spoke with Elena on the phone and noticed no signs of anything unusual. By around 6 p.m., according to Lucas's statement, both of them were at home and did not leave until they went to bed. The neighbor across the street reported that the living room lights remained on until about 9 p.m., meaning Elena was still active downstairs during that period. This confirmed that the last independently verifiable event was the living room lights being turned off at approximately 10 p.m. Although the neighbor was not certain of the exact minute, a small noise around 10 p.m. was also reported by one household, though its source could not be determined. Police considered this a valuable marker because it coincided with the time Lucas described Elena turning over for the last time before sleep, even though the two details might be unrelated. From that point, the 10 p.m. mark was established as the last time any signal from the Ward residence could be observed by outsiders. In the middle of the night, no witnesses provided any specific observations. The weather that night was severe. Heavy snowfall, strong winds, and limited visibility. This aligned with no one seeing movement in the area, but it also made it difficult for police to accurately determine the time the victim might have left the house, if that had actually occurred. Lucas stated that he woke up around 5 a.m. and realized Elena was no longer in bed. However, sunrise in Bangor on December 15, 2005, was approximately 7:07 a.m., meaning it was still dark when he woke up. Weather conditions at that time recorded temperatures below 10 degrees Fahrenheit, strong northeast winds, and more than 6 inches of snow accumulation overnight. The investigative team compared the weather data with the statement that Elena walked outside at dawn, noting a clear inconsistency. The time Lucas described had no natural light, and the bitterly cold wind made walking in regular clothing almost impossible. Additionally, the absence of footprints in the snow after a night of such heavy snowfall was highly unusual, as even a single step would leave a deep impression on the fresh snow surface. From this data, the investigative team began sketching the timeline of the final 12 hours, dividing it into main segments from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. Elena could be confirmed as engaging in normal activity inside the house, from 9 p.m. to 10 p.m. There were lights on, and a light noise from 10 p.m. to approximately 5 a.m. There was a period with no observable data, from 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. This was the window in which Lucas discovered Elena missing, yet no footprints or signs of departure were found. The timeline was marked with 3 levels of certainty: high for events supported by witnesses or environmental data, medium for details provided by Lucas that did not directly contradict other data, low for items that could not be immediately verified. When all the data was pieced together, the investigative team began narrowing down the most likely window of disappearance. The period from 10 p.m. on the 14th to approximately 5 a.m. on the 15th was designated as the focal time frame because there were no external observations whatsoever and no objective data proving Elena was still inside the house. After 10 p.m. factors such as the small noise near 10 p.m., the turning off of the living room lights, and the tidy, undisturbed state of the bedroom were used to establish 10 p.m. as the last possible confirmed time Elena was alive or still in the house. However, due to the complete lack of physical evidence pinpointing exactly what happened during the 10 p.m., 5 a.m. window, the team marked this as an interval of high variability in the timeline, requiring thorough further examination in subsequent steps. Upon completing the preliminary timeline, they created a clear sequence of events that was still missing many pieces, particularly any actions or movements during the night for which there were no witnesses. These time markers became the foundational analytical framework for the entire subsequent investigation, helping to identify points that needed deeper checking and details that required cross-verification with technical data or additional witnesses in order to narrow down the cause of Elena Ward's disappearance. Immediately after finalizing the preliminary timeline and identifying the most likely critical time window for the incident, search teams were deployed to cover the area near the Ward residence, prioritizing a radius of 1 to 2 miles measured from the front door. The scale was established based on a basic assumption: if Elena had truly left the house on foot during the harsh weather conditions of the night of December 14th into the early morning of December 15th, she would not have been able to travel more than a few miles through deep snow and strong winds. The search team consisted of members from the Bangor Police Department, Maine Warden Service, and several local experienced volunteers. Operations were divided into 2 main directions: systematic ground searching and deployment of K9 tracking units to detect any remaining heat trails, scents, or signs of movement after the blizzard. The area around the Ward residence consisted mainly of sparse woods interspersed with open clearings and narrow trails leading deeper into the back lots toward the northwest. From the outset, search efforts focused on the most accessible area, the main trail running from the backyard of the Ward house and connecting to a small wooded area. However, the fresh layer of snow more than 6 inches deep had erased all footprints or drag marks on the surface, significantly reducing the chance of detecting visible traces. The K9 tracking team deployed 2 dogs trained to search for missing persons in winter conditions. However, success depended on the presence of residual human scent or scent particles at the scene, something easily neutralized by the extremely low temperatures and biting winds throughout the previous night. The dogs were first given Elena's personal items to establish a baseline scent, then released to sweep the areas around the front and backyards. Both dogs were unable to establish any specific direction of travel, indicating that if Elena had left the house, she did not move along conventional paths or her scent had been completely erased by the weather. This led the search team to shift to a broad sweep tactic, dividing the 1-2 mile area into grid sections, with each team responsible for one section, conducting zigzag pattern searches to ensure no areas were missed. Within the 1 mile radius, teams swept the main trail and its side branches leading into the woods. Snow-covered trees showed no signs of breakage, snapping, or displacement, indicating no one had forced their way through the area during the storm. Nearby open clearings were visually checked for unusual snow subsidence, slide marks, or any objects standing out against the white background. No clothing, scarves, purses, or any personal items possibly related to Elena were found. When moving to areas closer to the main road, teams inspected drainage ditches, culverts, and snow depressions formed by slopes, potential hazard points if the victim had slipped or lost balance while walking. However, all drainage systems were thickly covered with snow and showed no signs of disruption or unusual sinking, indicating no heavy object had fallen in. The Maine Warden Service expanded the search into the woods opposite the Ward residence. Despite limited visibility and complex terrain, the team followed a marked line tactic to systematically sweep small sections of forest. They searched for items such as knit hats, gloves, scarves, or objects commonly dropped when a victim is in distress, but nothing was found. Locations suspected of having hollows beneath the snow, such as rotted tree stumps or terrain depressions, were probed with poles. No location showed signs of anything buried underneath. Simultaneously, the K-9 team was deployed a second time, this time starting from the beginning of Pushaw Road and searching along the main traffic axis. If Elena had walked out to the main road before changing direction, her scent might have persisted longer on snow surfaces less affected by wind. However, the result remained the same. The search dogs detected no clear path, likely because the scent had completely dissipated or the victim had never walked in that direction. Teams also checked fences and roadside brush where a pedestrian might have tripped or snagged clothing, but no fibers, scratches, or small items were discovered. When expanding to the 2-mile range, the search party examined side turnoffs and deeper forest trails commonly used by local hunters. Although the weather had eased, the previous night's snow still obliterated all traces. Teams employed contour line search techniques to cover areas prone to deep snow accumulation, ensuring no possibility of the victim being buried under snow. After nearly 3 continuous hours of searching, the rescue forces concluded that there was no evidence whatsoever indicating Elena had ever left the house or been present in the surrounding areas after the time Lucas reported. No dropped items, no slide marks, no footprints, no unusual snow accumulation points, and no witnesses along the trails reported seeing anyone walking in such extreme weather conditions. The preliminary report confirmed the 1-2-mile radius around the Ward residence showed no physical evidence or signs of the victim's movement, significantly weakening the left-the-house-on-foot hypothesis. The search team handed over all findings to the investigative unit, concluding the initial sweep phase with the status nothing of value discovered. After the search team found no traces within the 1-2-mile radius around the Ward residence, the investigative unit moved to the next step in missing person protocol, canvassing the entire neighboring residential area and collecting any surviving image data, particularly VHS tapes, which were commonly used by many households in the early 2000s. The objective of this step was to determine whether any person or device had recorded movement related to Elena or any activity around the Ward residence on the night she disappeared. The first request issued was an inventory of all residences within a few hundred meters, identifying which households had security cameras, video doorbells, or garages with recording equipment facing the road. On Pushaw Road, only 7 households were recorded as using analog VHS cameras in 2005, a relatively low number but still potentially offering critical clues. The investigative team divided up and knocked on doors, explaining the situation and requesting permission to collect the VHS tapes from the night of December 14th and morning of December 15th. Most households cooperated, though some devices were old, malfunctioning, or had been recorded over multiple times. The readable VHS tapes were brought to the police station for digitization and frame-by-frame analysis. The analysis required viewing long segments, as older cameras often lacked smooth motion and had low image quality. However, within the first few hours of review, one important detail was noted. At approximately 5:59 a.m., the camera from the house across the street captured the silver Lexus belonging to Lucas, leaving the driveway, headlights on, and proceeding down Pushaw Road. This data was flagged as objective confirmation, as the image appeared in conditions with snow, still thick but clear enough to identify the vehicle, based on its features and prior parking position. This was the first time the investigative team obtained a precise camera-recorded time point, in contrast to merely estimated statements. Additionally, no camera captured any image of Elena leaving the house during the night of December 14th or early morning of December 15th. No pedestrian figure was seen crossing the yard, no movement at the front door, back door, or driveway. Cameras at various angles along the road also recorded no pedestrians during the time frame from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., consistent with the extremely poor weather conditions that made walking virtually impossible. While analyzing the tapes, the investigative team scrutinized each time segment to ensure nothing was missed: unusual movement in the yard, strange lighting, shadows, disturbed snow, or unfamiliar vehicles passing by. However, the results were uniformly negative. Apart from Lucas's vehicle, no other vehicles stopped or slowed in front of the Ward residence that night or morning. The complete absence of Elena from any recording device produced significant negative evidence, particularly when contrasted with the statement that she left the house at early morning. After processing households with cameras, the investigative team compiled a list of residences without recording equipment, or with cameras that were broken, overwritten, or positioned in ways that did not cover the front of the Ward residence. This list played an important role in identifying visual blind spots, areas that residential cameras could not cover. When mapping the entire area, the largest blind spot appeared behind the Ward residence and extended toward the sparse forest strip, where terrain prevented any camera from capturing movement in darkness. Another blind spot existed along the segment of road leading to a side street about 150 meters from the house, where two households had no recording equipment at all, despite having open driveways facing the road. These blind spots were noted as high-risk information gaps. If any movement had occurred there, pedestrian, vehicle with lights off, or unusual activity, cameras would not have captured it. Nevertheless, the investigative team emphasized that all obtained camera footage failed to show Elena leaving the house, and there was no evidence whatsoever of her appearing outside during the critical time window established by the timeline. Another detail was included in the report on some slow-motion segments. Heavy snowfall and strong winds created long white streaks across the frame, occasionally obscuring the left or right corners of the screen. The investigative team assessed the likelihood of missing a walking human figure as extremely low, because a person moving within 15-20 meters of a camera would produce a clear contrasting shadow even in heavy snow. All image data was subsequently tagged and classified by value: confirmatory evidence, negative evidence, and areas without coverage. The compiled report was forwarded to the analysis group to prepare for cross-referencing with the timeline and identifying areas requiring deeper environmental examination. In parallel with analyzing footage from peripheral cameras, the investigative team shifted to evaluating all of Elena's personal activity in the period leading up to her disappearance, focusing on three key data sources: mobile phone, personal email, and bank account. The objective was to determine the last time the victim's devices and accounts were active, then cross-check against the previously constructed event timeline. The first step was accessing Elena's phone records. According to U.S. cellular data, her phone recorded its last call at 8:12 p.m. on December 14th. A brief call with her younger sister. After that time, there were no outgoing or incoming calls, no sent messages, and no data access signals. Network logs showed the phone completely lost connection around 10:05 p.m., the same time neighbors reported the living room lights going off, and close to the time the small noise was heard. The phone did not power back on during the night, and sent no pings to any cell towers in the area. This ruled out the possibility that the victim left the house and moved to another area with phone coverage, as the device left no trace of movement across adjacent cell towers. When compared with voluntary missing person cases, phones typically register on towers at least a few times as the person travels, even if later turned off. But in Elena's case, the device entered a non-operational state from the previous evening and remained that way until the following morning, with no sign of location change whatsoever. After the phone, the investigative team accessed Elena's email history through her long-used AOL account. Access logs showed the last login to the account occurred from the home computer at the Ward residence at 6:17 p.m. on December 14. There were no accesses from mobile devices that evening, even though Elena normally checked email on her phone before bed, especially on days with a heavy work schedule. The account recorded no activity after that time. No new emails opened, no messages sent, no password changes, no new device linkages. The lack of access on the night of the 14th or morning of the 15th, when cross-referenced with her usual habits, further reinforced the conclusion that Elena had ceased all personal activity before disappearing, rather than leaving the house voluntarily while carrying her devices. The next step was examining banking activity. The investigative team worked with Elena's bank and collected transaction history for the 72 hours immediately preceding her disappearance. Results showed completely normal activity: grocery purchase at 5:03 p.m. on the 14th, electronic bill payment on the 13th, and no cash withdrawals during the 3 days prior to the event. Notably, on December 15th, the day Lucas reported Elena had walked outside, there was no transaction activity whatsoever. The balance remained unchanged: no card swipes, no ATM withdrawals, no online banking logins. The investigative team assessed the financial activity as absolute standstill immediately following the last recorded time she was known to be alive. In voluntary departure cases, especially among working adults, financial traces almost always appear: cash withdrawals, gas purchases, personal item buys, or at least small transfers. Here, Elena left behind all assets: cash, identification documents, and bank cards. Absolutely no transactions occurred after her disappearance. This ran completely counter to the planned departure pattern, which is always evidenced by financial behaviors indicating preparation or at least interaction after leaving the residence. When combining the three data sources, phone, email, and bank, the investigative team observed that all of Elena's personal activity ceased within the same time frame, from approximately 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. on December 14th. This window also matched the last time neighbors saw lights in the house and fell within the period the timeline had marked as the beginning of the high-risk interval, extending into early morning. Crucially, all three data sources produced a consistent result. There was no indication whatsoever that Elena had actively prepared to leave the house, leave town, or engaged in any financial communication or personal management behavior that would support the hypothesis of voluntary disappearance. Phone off, email not accessed, bank account inactive, all ceased abruptly with no transition signs. These simultaneous cessations led the investigative team to a clear interim conclusion: Elena did not leave the house intentionally, did not depart according to a plan, and did not perform any preparatory actions before disappearing. This data was entered into the case file as strong negative evidence, helping to rule out the possibility of planned voluntary departure, while simultaneously reinforcing the highly anomalous nature of the disappearance from the very early stages of the investigation. The analysis of personal activity data sources shows that Elena exhibited no signs of leaving the house voluntarily, and the initial search results within a 1-2 mile radius yielded absolutely no physical evidence, forcing the investigative team to expand the search area. The objective of this phase was to thoroughly sweep all complex terrain areas within a 3-5 mile radius of the Ward residence, including Pushaw Lake to the northwest, the southern edge of Bangor City Forest, and the swampy areas. Old logging roads interspersed among sparse forest and strips of wasteland. Despite continuing adverse weather, the search team still had to take advantage of every brief period when wind intensity decreased to deploy specialized teams. Pushaw Lake was the first area considered. The lake is large, with an extensive shoreline and portions of its surface frozen at the time in December. The investigative team divided the shoreline into multiple small segments, with each team responsible for sweeping one section, searching for footprints, dropped items, or any unusual cracks in the ice surface that might indicate someone had stepped onto it during the blizzard night. However, the lake ice was covered by a thick new layer of snow, making it nearly impossible to distinguish disturbances. The ice survey team used ice probes and thickness gauges at suspicious points, but the entire surface was uniform, with no areas showing signs of subsidence or impact from human weight. After completing the lake area, the search team moved to the forest east of Pushaw Lake, where numerous small trails used by local hunters existed. Although the terrain was scattered with many fallen trees, the team still followed a parallel grid search tactic to ensure no ground was missed. No signs of snagged clothing, sliding marks, or drag marks of any object through the snow were found. Some areas showed slight snow depressions, but upon digging, these proved to be only thin snow layers over decayed tree stumps or rocks, unrelated to the missing person. The next point within the 3-5-mile radius was the southern edge of Bangor City Forest, a vast area with a dense network of trails and many small paths leading deep into thick woods. This was the most complex area in the entire search radius because the large tree canopy limited visibility, while the snow layer under the canopy was thinner, easily causing confusion between animal tracks and potential human tracks. The search team had to use handheld GPS devices to ensure they did not retrace the same paths. Locations with potential for temporary shelter, such as under large tree roots, near rock outcrops, or beside abandoned hunting blinds, were all carefully checked, but no items related to Elena were found. Some trails showed old pedestrian footprints, but after evaluating depth and direction of travel, these were determined to belong to local residents from days before the snowfall and could not be considered traces of the victim. When moving to the swampy area near the eastern entrance of City Forest, the search team encountered additional obstacles from thin ice and snow-covered water pockets. Depressions covered by snow were probed with steel poles. Then the overlying snow was dug away to examine the underlying structure. All points were confirmed stable, with no signs of objects having fallen through. If a person had fallen into thin ice in the swamp, the snow above would typically show cracking, sinking, or breaking patterns, but this area displayed no such signs. Next, the SAR team moved to the area of old logging roads in the southwest, where the terrain consisted of many dirt roads running deep into the forest that were no longer regularly used. These roads were locations where objects could potentially be concealed under snow because the tree cover did not completely block light, and wind could easily blow snow into large accumulation drifts. Teams were assigned to sweep each road segment, paying particular attention to large snow pits, gravel beds, and areas adjacent to abandoned wood piles. However, every suspicious location examined showed intact snow layers with no disturbance or signs of human body weight. The investigative team also noted that no new trails had been created after the blizzard night, meaning no one had walked through these areas during the time of the disappearance. To ensure no area was overlooked, the SAR team was reinforced with additional personnel from a neighboring city. They coordinated once again with the K9 team for a wide area sweep. Although search dogs require more stable scent conditions, the team still hoped that expanding the radius would reveal any remaining traces in less wind-exposed areas. However, the results remained unchanged. No specific scent trails leading in any clear direction. The SAR team's standard was to check every high-risk area such as rock crevices, snow pits, locations where fallen tree trunks created voids, and dense thickets where a fallen person might be hidden from view. But all showed no signs whatsoever. The final report for the 3-5-mile search phase recorded no physical evidence found, no traces of victim movement, and no proof indicating that Elena had ever been present in the expanded area. This further reinforced the investigative team's assessment that the hypothesis of the victim leaving the house on foot was highly unlikely, and the expanded search still failed to explain Elena's complete disappearance under the heavy snowfall conditions of that night. After completing the expanded search within the 3-5-mile radius without discovering any physical evidence, the investigative team returned to a deeper analysis of the previously constructed timeline, this time directly cross-referencing it with actual environmental data from the night of December 14th and early morning of December 15th to evaluate the feasibility of the hypothesis that Elena walked out of the house at daybreak, as stated by Lucas. First, the team collected all weather data from the National Weather Service, including wind speed, snowfall accumulation, temperature and wind chill index. From 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. results showed wind speeds reaching 20-24 miles per hour around 10 p.m., with gusts up to 28 miles per hour at times, snowfall of 2 to 4 inches over the following 4 hours, and a total new snow accumulation on the ground by the next morning exceeding 6 inches. The lowest temperature recorded that night was approximately 8 degrees Fahrenheit, with wind chill dropping below 0 degrees Fahrenheit. This data was placed alongside the initial timeline milestones. The living room light went off shortly before 10 p.m. Small noises occurred around the same time. Elena's phone lost signal at 10:05 p.m. and no further personal activity was recorded after that point. When the team compared Lucas's statement that Elena left the house at daybreak, estimated around 5 a.m. or 5:15 a.m., with the environmental conditions at that time, a series of inconsistencies emerged. First, the time Lucas described did not actually correspond to true daybreak. On December 15, 2005, sunrise in Bangor occurred at 7:07 a.m., meaning around 5 a.m. it was still completely dark, the temperature was at its lowest point of the night, and strong winds persisted. It is highly implausible for a person to leave the house without a heavy coat, without a flashlight or any supportive equipment, in near-zero visibility conditions. Next, the team cross-referenced wind speed and snowfall with the surfaces around the Ward residence. If Elena had left through the front or back door, she would have left deep footprints 3 to 5 inches in the fresh snow. However, from the start of the search through the sour expansion, no footprints whatsoever were recorded, even in the immediate porch area where wind was minimal and snow would easily retain impressions. The absolute absence of footprints is the single largest inconsistency when compared to Lucas's statement. Moreover, even with heavy snowfall, any movement between 5 and 6 a.m. would have left visible signs for at least a few minutes before new snow covered them. But weather records show that from 4:30 to 6 a.m., snowfall intensity temporarily decreased, even nearly stopping at times, meaning if Elena had stepped out during this window, footprints would likely have remained until police arrived at the scene, yet none existed. Upon deeper evaluation, the team examined areas where strong winds blew across the front and backyards. Wind can erase shallow impressions, but it cannot completely obliterate the prints of an adult walking on thick snow, especially at very low temperatures that cause the snow surface to harden and hold deep impressions. Snow scene specialists confirmed that under those night's conditions, footprints would have left clear, deep indentations that could not be entirely wind erased within 1-2 hours. This renders the hypothesis of Elena walking out of the house highly implausible. Another major inconsistency is that Elena supposedly left without her winter coat. At 8 degrees Fahrenheit with wind chill below 0 degrees Fahrenheit, hypothermia can set in within minutes. Family-provided personal habit data shows Elena always dressed warmly and never left the house without a coat, especially in bad weather. Leaving under those conditions, in complete darkness, without any equipment, is almost entirely inconsistent with the victim's actual behavior. When compiling all factors, the investigative team created an analysis table of inconsistencies between the statement and actual conditions. 1. Time of departure does not match environmental light. 2. Snow and wind conditions do not allow walking without leaving traces. 3. No footprints exist around the property. 4. Elena's personal habits do not align with leaving in extreme cold. 5. No independent data, source, camera, phone, or otherwise, records her movement. From this, the team assessed the plausibility of Elena walking out of the house as very low, practically impossible from any physical standpoint. The lack of footprints, absence of camera footage, missing phone data, and no evidence in the search area caused this hypothesis to collapse when confronted with environmental data. The detailed timeline was revised to reflect that Elena's disappearance almost certainly occurred before 5 a.m. during the darkest and coldest part of the night, directly contradicting Lucas's original statement. Identifying this inconsistency helped the investigative team narrow the focus of analysis and eliminate one of the largest possibilities initially put forward by Lucas in the early hours of the disappearance. After the in-depth timeline analysis and determination of the extreme implausibility of the walking out hypothesis, the investigative team proceeded to evaluate all possible exits from the Ward residence to determine which path Elena might have used if she had truly left during the night of her disappearance. The review focused on 3 main points: the front door, the back door, and the garage, as these were the only reasonable exits available to someone inside the house. First, police examined the front door. During the initial welfare check, the front door was recorded as locked from the inside, with no signs of forced entry or heavy impact. The lock was a standard deadbolt requiring manual turning from the inside to engage. If Elena had left through this door without a key, the door could not naturally relock itself from the outside. The investigative team confirmed that upon their arrival, the front door was in a deadbolt locked state, consistent with the last person to touch the lock still being inside after operating it. This directly contradicts the claim that Elena left alone. The front porch surface and steps were also re-examined via initial crime scene photographs. Snow lay evenly with no characteristic indentations or surface cracks from footprints. Given snow depth exceeding 6 inches and temperatures below 10 degrees Fahrenheit, footprints would have been sharply defined and persisted for hours unless covered by new snow in a short time. However, the period from 4:30 to 6 a.m. was recorded as having slowed or nearly stopped snowfall. So if Elena had stepped out the front door during the time Lucas described, even small traces should have remained. No snow compression whatsoever, indicating descent of the steps, was found. Next, the team turned to the back door. The Ward residence's back door opened onto a small yard connecting to sparse woods, considered a possible exit if someone wished to leave while avoiding neighbor or camera visibility. Inspection of hinges, lock, and door frame revealed no signs of forced opening, prying, or tool use. Like the front door, the back door was also locked from the inside when police arrived. The snow layer immediately outside the back door threshold was thick and smooth, with no sliding marks, footprints, or any form of disturbance. Investigators closely examined the door edges, where snow typically forms a thin layer due to blocked wind, but here the snow was too uniform to have been affected by the door being opened that night. If Elena had gone out the back door, even for a few seconds, snow at the threshold and steps would have been displaced, compressed, or shifted, yet everything remained pristine. Additionally, the backyard surface was compared using initial photographs. The snow cover retained light wind-rippled patterns, with no linear compression chains or depressions indicating movement of a body or object. At that night's temperatures, any object weighing 50 kilograms or more placed on the snow would leave noticeable indentations visible even hours later. No such marks were detected. The third exit was the garage. This was the only plausible exit if someone wanted to leave the house without leaving footprints in the snow. The Ward residence garage door was operated by an interior control panel or a remote mounted in the Lexus vehicle. The investigative team checked garage activity and confirmed the door could be opened from inside and then closed, using the remote as the vehicle departed. However, other factors make this route incompatible with the Elena walking hypothesis. First, the family's Lexus was recorded leaving the residence at 5:59 a.m. via a neighbor's camera, and Lucas was the driver according to his statement. Second, if Elena had left through the garage before this time, the snow immediately adjacent to the garage door would show disturbance from the door opening and a person stepping out. Yet the snow in front of the garage remained completely undisturbed, indicating the garage door was not opened at any point during the night prior to Lucas's vehicle departure. This confirms no pedestrian activity through the garage before 5:59 a.m. Third, if Elena had left via the garage without the vehicle, she would have had to step onto the snow right at the edge of the driveway. This area was recorded as having even snow cover, with no indentations or drag marks. No evidence whatsoever suggests a pedestrian crossed the driveway at any time during the night. When placing all three exits side by side and cross-referencing them with the snow conditions of the night of December 14th, 15, the investigative team concluded that no reasonable path existed for Elena to have left the house on foot without leaving traces. Every snow surface remained pristine, while weather records indicate a period of temporarily stopped snowfall in the early morning hours, meaning any footprints would have had to persist until police arrival. Furthermore, no drag marks of any object appeared around the front or backyard, ruling out the possibility of Elena being dragged out of the house on foot. Summarizing the scene observations, the investigative team marked in the report that the likelihood of the victim leaving the house on foot is extremely low, practically zero, based on physical analysis of the environment and snow condition. All three exits examined showed no signs of use during the time of disappearance, significantly narrowing the possible scenarios that could have occurred on the night Elena Ward vanished. After ruling out the possibility that Elena left the house on foot based on the analysis of exit points and snow conditions, the investigative team moved to the next step: a comprehensive inventory of all remaining personal belongings in the house to determine the level of preparation she had made before disappearing. Inventorying personal items is one of the most effective methods for assessing whether a victim left the house voluntarily or was prevented from doing so. In Elena's case, this process was especially critical because all external environmental evidence indicated that she had not stepped outside the house even once during the night of December 14th or the morning of December 15th. First, police noted the location of Elena's wallet. The wallet was found in a small cabinet drawer next to the living room entrance, the place where she always kept it after returning from work or grocery shopping. Inside the wallet were all her bank cards, Idaho card, driver's license, and a small amount of cash, only a few tens of dollars in total. The wallet was in completely normal condition. It had not been ransacked. No documents had been removed or rearranged. This indicated that Elena had no intention of going out to shop, had not planned to use public transportation, and had made no preparations for leaving the house that involved personal finances. When an adult chooses to leave home, even for a short walk, they almost always take their wallet or at least some form of identification. The presence of all documents in the wallet strongly supported the conclusion that Elena did not leave the house voluntarily. The investigative team next inventoried keys. Elena's car keys and house keys were found placed on the tray by the door, exactly the spot the family said she always put them after coming home from work. If Elena had left the house, whether through the front or back door, she would not have been able to lock the door from the outside without taking the keys with her. However, both sets of keys remained in their usual places inside the house, and the front door was discovered to be deadbolt locked from the inside. The combination of these two factors showed that Elena could not have been the one to leave the house and lock the door behind her. Physically, that scenario is impossible if she were outside. The fact that she also left the car keys made the hypothesis of a planned departure even more implausible, since the car was the only means of transportation that would allow her to move in bad weather conditions, and the suburban area of Bangor has virtually no public transportation. Next, police examined Elena's winter coats. According to the family, Elena owned 3 winter coats and always wore one of them whenever she went outside, especially on days when temperatures dropped below freezing. All 3 coats were found neatly hung in the closet next to the entrance. None had been taken down or misplaced, and there were no signs that she had put one on and then returned to put it back. This was one of the most unusual and striking details. An adult living in Maine in December would almost never leave the house without a coat, except perhaps for a few seconds to take out the trash or check something right on the porch. Walking in -10 degrees Fahrenheit weather with strong winds without a heavy coat is practically impossible. According to weather data, the wind chill at the time Lucas described could cause frostbite to exposed skin within minutes. The presence of all 3 coats in the closet led the investigative team to conclude that Elena could not have left the house unprotected, and certainly could not have gone any significant distance without being in serious danger. Elena's phone, the final and most critical item, was found on the nightstand next to her bed, powered off. Logs showed that the phone disconnected from the network at 10:05 p.m. on December 14th. It could have been turned off due to a dead battery or manually, but the family stated that Elena always charged her phone overnight and rarely let the battery drop below 30%. Moreover, if Elena had planned to leave the house at 5 a.m., as Lucas described, the likelihood that she would leave her phone behind was extremely low. The phone was her primary means of communication, and she frequently used it to listen to music while walking. The combination of the phone's location, the time it was turned off, and Elena's personal habits made the scenario of leaving the house at dawn without her phone completely inconsistent with her actual behavior. When comparing all the items left behind, wallet, keys, coats, phone, the investigative team identified an abnormal pattern. Not a single essential item was taken, as would be expected in cases where a victim leaves voluntarily, with preparation, or even in spontaneous departures where the person still needs basic protection from the weather. Furthermore, all 4 categories of items were found in their usual daily positions, with no signs of being searched for or rearranged. This was not the scene of someone leaving to clear their mind, not the scene of someone running away in the night, and not the scene of someone hurriedly leaving due to a personal emergency. Everything appeared as though Elena completely ceased activity around 10 p.m. and performed no preparatory actions after that point. Police applied the level of readiness to leave technique, a method of assessment based on the presence or absence of essential items. In previously analyzed missing person cases, individuals who left with preparation almost never abandoned their phone, wallet, keys, and coat simultaneously. The fact that all 4 were left behind proved that Elena did not leave the house according to any normal behavioral pattern of someone intending to depart, whether briefly or for an extended period. The conclusion was entered into the report. Elena's level of readiness to leave the house was 0. The abnormality of abandoning all essential possessions led the investigative team to completely rule out the hypothesis that the victim left the house alone and of her own volition, while reinforcing the alert that this disappearance was inconsistent with any scenario of voluntary departure. After completing the inventory of all of Elena's personal belongings and determining that she had undertaken no preparatory actions before disappearing, the investigative team proceeded to evaluate the 3 initial scenarios according to standard Bangor PD procedure: accident, voluntary departure, and foul play. The goal of this step was to use all data collected from sections 5 through 11, including search results, environmental analysis, timeline, exit points, and personal belongings, to eliminate inconsistent scenarios, narrow the scope of assessment, and determine the nature of the disappearance. Scenario 1, accident, was examined first. The investigative team considered the possibility that Elena left the house alone, encountered an incident due to slippery surfaces, fell into a snowbank, or became lost in the woods and suffered hypothermia. However, the sweeps conducted within a 1-2 mile radius and extended to 3-5 miles found no footprints, skid marks, dropped items, or any form of disturbance in the snow. In snow-related accident cases, particularly in residential areas, victims typically leave clear physical traces, uneven footprints, long skid marks in soft snow, or impressions from clothing when the body falls. Yet the entire area surrounding the Ward residence and all accessible routes remained pristine. K9 tracking was deployed twice, with no scent trail leading away from the porch. Dangerous areas such as frozen lakes, swamps, forest edges, and logging roads were thoroughly checked and showed no evidence of a fall or burial under the surface. Additionally, the investigative team determined that the weather conditions on the night of December 14th made leaving the house without a coat nearly impossible for any distance beyond a few steps. Since Elena left all 3 coats in the closet, the possibility that she went out unprotected and then suffered an accident was physiologically and behaviorally implausible. All of these factors combined led to the conclusion the accident scenario was inconsistent with the actual evidence. The investigative team then moved to Scenario 2, voluntary departure. This scenario had to be objectively considered, even though the family insisted there was no reason for Elena to leave voluntarily. Analysis of personal habits from journals, family statements, and banking data showed that Elena had no financial difficulties, no signs of depression, no prolonged conflicts with family members, and no transactions indicating preparation for travel. Her phone was turned off at 10:05 p.m. Her wallet and keys were left behind. Bank cards were never used, and her email showed no activity after that time. A person who chooses to leave typically takes at least some essentials: wallet, phone, keys, or even a small bag. But Elena left all essential items in their usual places, which is completely contrary to the behavior of someone leaving voluntarily. The investigative team also considered the possibility of a short-term voluntary departure, such as a walk to relieve emotional stress. However, analysis from sections 9 and 10 showed no footprints, no exit points used, and weather conditions that made leaving on foot without leaving traces impossible. Additionally, perimeter cameras recorded no figures, movement, or images indicating that Elena left the house that night. If she had walked to someone's house or a nearby location, the journey would necessarily have left tracks in the snow, yet the snow around the entire house remained undisturbed. Thus, the voluntary departure scenario was inconsistent with both behavioral patterns and environmental evidence. Finally, Scenario 3, foul play, was analyzed. This was not a conclusion the investigative team rushed to, but it had to be evaluated, given that the other 2 scenarios were incompatible with any collected data. In all unusual disappearances, foul play is considered when the victim could not have left the house by any reasonable means. Data from sections 5 through 11 showed that Elena did not leave on foot, did not take personal items, and left no physical traces. This forced the investigative team to consider the possibility that the victim encountered an incident inside the house rather than outside. Although at this stage, there was no evidence pointing to a perpetrator or method of harm, the static scene, lack of signs of departure, combined with the sudden disconnection of the phone around 10 p.m., created an abnormal gap in the timeline. The possibility of foul play was not proven, but neither could it be ruled out, especially given the complete elimination of the other 2 scenarios. When synthesizing all information from sections 5 through 11, failed searches, absence of footprints, interrupted timeline, abandoned belongings, unused exit points, and personal habits inconsistent with voluntary departure, the investigative team reached its initial official conclusion. This was an unusual disappearance, inconsistent with natural or voluntary missing person patterns. This conclusion was recorded in the internal report and laid the foundation for subsequent case analysis steps. After evaluating the 3 initial scenarios and concluding that the case was an unusual disappearance, the investigative team was forced to move into the phase of reviewing the legal framework to determine the permissible scope of further action. In missing person cases in Maine, in 2005, legal procedure required police to establish probable cause, a reasonable level of suspicion based on specific evidence, before upgrading a case from missing person to criminal investigation. However, although all data from sections 5 through 12 showed many unusual elements in Elena's disappearance, police still lacked any physical evidence, direct witnesses, or strong crime scene indicators sufficient to prove that a crime had occurred. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of violence, no witnesses to a conflict, and no camera footage showing another individual entering the Ward residence. Therefore, when Bangor PD consulted with the Penobscot County District Attorney's Office, both sides assessed that the current level of suspicion only reached suspicious disappearance, insufficient to establish a legal basis for expanded search warrants or in-depth data seizure. This became the first major bottleneck in the investigation. The prosecutor requested that police provide any objective evidence showing Elena had been coerced or harmed, but the investigative team had nothing beyond the elimination of other scenarios. Ruling out accident and voluntary departure does not equate to proving foul play. Despite strong investigative inferences, the law does not allow police to rely on inference alone to obtain warrants for in-depth searches of personal property, vehicles, or household devices. Consequently, the proposal to seek a comprehensive search warrant for the Ward residence, including authority to seize electronic devices, collect trace evidence, or dismantle interior fixtures, was deemed by the prosecutor to be premature, not meeting the necessary threshold, and failing to satisfy probable cause standards. This meant investigators were limited to plain view observation inside the home. They could not pull up flooring, test for trace evidence, seize items, or expand searches to anyone's property. The garage had been identified as an area needing closer inspection after the exit point analysis, but without evidence of criminal activity, police could not obtain a warrant for in-depth examination and had to accept that the garage would only be assessed at a basic visual level. Additionally, phone and banking data had initially been provided to police voluntarily by the family and bank under the missing person framework, but police could not request deeper queries, such as historical location data, detailed cell tower records, or device backup data, without demonstrating a criminal investigative purpose. Similarly, forensic analysis of the family's Lexus, despite several points in the timeline indicating the vehicle left the house at dawn, could not be performed. Lack of probable cause meant police were not permitted to dismantle the vehicle interior, collect floor samples, or analyze microscopic trace evidence that might exist on surfaces. Another difficulty involved obtaining expanded statements. Because this remained a missing person case rather than a criminal investigation, police could not compel anyone to cooperate beyond voluntary limits. They also could not issue subpoenas for health records, electronic records, or any other documents related to individuals who might fall within the scope of suspicion. This severely restricted the ability to build behavioral profiles of involved persons, including Lucas. The investigative team noted that lack of cooperation or inconsistent answers from involved parties could not be forced to be clarified, as no evidence existed to show they had committed a crime. As a result, all progress slowed significantly. Requests for expanded investigative measures, such as warrants for phone tracking, cell tower queries, license plate scans in the area, or collection of swipe card data from workplaces of involved parties, could not be pursued because they fell outside the scope of a missing person case. All these legal limitations led to the case becoming stalled. Bangor PD continued to maintain the file as an active missing person investigation, but internal reports clearly stated that no new investigative avenues were feasible without the emergence of new evidence or witnesses. The space for police action narrowed to the point where they could only re-examine existing information without authority to expand. The investigation did not stop, but it did not advance. The Elena Ward case began to fall into the internally recognized state of unable to progress yet unable to close, a difficult limbo for both police and prosecutors. In that context, Elena's case was officially tagged in the system, no further actionable leads, signaling a prolonged period of investigative stagnation. The period of 2006-2007 marked the time when Bangor PD shifted from active investigation to maintaining the case in a passive monitoring status, with most activity revolving around receiving, screening, and ruling out tips submitted from various sources. After the Elena Ward case was widely publicized through the NCIC system and the Maine State Missing Persons Clearinghouse, Bangor PD's tip hotline continuously received calls from residents both inside and outside the state, mostly concerning sightings, hearsay information, or personal speculation. The investigative team's task during this period was to record all tips, prioritize them, verify them, and rule them out if they did not qualify as new leads. The total number of tips over the 2 years exceeded 200, but nearly all were eliminated after verification. The most common sightings were reports of a brown-haired woman who looked like Elena at gas stations, convenience stores, or areas near forests. Each sighting was logged into the system, cross-checked against time, physical description, age, clothing, and location, then forwarded to the patrol unit responsible for the area. However, all verifications ended the same way. The person seen was a local resident, sometimes a tourist, or simply a misidentification from a distance in poor lighting. Some callers provided very specific descriptions, but by the time police reached the location, the person had left, and any available security camera footage usually lacked sufficient resolution to identify the individual. Most sightings were ruled out within 24 hours. Another group of tips came from people who believed Elena might have run away or started a new life in the Portland area, or even in other states such as New Hampshire or Vermont. Police followed procedure by checking banking activity, credit cards, and DMV databases for signs of identity use, but the results were always negative. No transactions, no new registrations, no new medical records. Tips of this nature were classified as speculative and closed immediately after data cross-checking. Many calls came from people claiming they had heard from someone or heard rumors that Elena had been abducted by someone, locked in an abandoned house, or taken out of state. However, when police asked for specific information, location, names of involved parties, direct evidence, most callers could provide nothing beyond rumor. These tips were recorded, marked as low priority, and ruled out as soon as no verifiable elements emerged. Some other tips concerned large forested areas such as Baxter State Park, Mahoosic Range, or the Appalachian Trail. Certain individuals believed Elena might have walked into the woods and never returned, but analysis from previous investigative sections showed this was inconsistent with the environmental conditions, clothing, and behavior documented on the night of her disappearance. Nevertheless, police still forwarded these tips to the ranger teams responsible for those areas for monitoring in case any evidence appeared. Over the 2 years, no signs related to Elena were recorded in any of the mentioned areas. The investigative team also received tips from individuals prone to providing unfounded information, a common phenomenon in long-term missing person cases. A few people contacted police multiple times, offering constantly changing theories or claiming they had seen Elena in a dream and treating it as a lead. Per policy, police recorded these, but classified them as unverifiable and did not use them in the official investigative process. Some tips requested that Bangor PD check abandoned houses, old barns, or private properties. However, as established in Section 13, police lacked probable cause to obtain warrants for private locations, and without direct linking evidence, they could only inspect public areas or properties where owners voluntarily granted access. None of those inspections yielded new leads. Additionally, a few tips related to the family's Lexus, with some claiming they had seen the vehicle in nearby areas on the day of the disappearance. When Bangor PD cross-checked times and locations against perimeter camera footage collected in Section 6, all of these sightings proved seriously inaccurate, either in timing, location, or vehicle description. Some tips were simply emotional calls from concerned residents expressing general suspicions about someone in the neighborhood or feeling that something wasn't right, but without any actionable facts. Police recorded them per procedure, but could not develop them into investigative leads. By the end of 2007, the consolidated tip report was completed. More than 200 tips were received, of which 100% were ruled out after verification. No reliable sightings, no new physical evidence, and no new data related to the timeline, manner of departure, or victim behavior prior to disappearance were obtained. The case status was updated to no viable leads, and Bangor PD officially recorded it as a non-progressing missing person case, pending any future information. By early 2008, after 2 years of receiving and completely ruling out more than 200 tips without finding any viable investigative leads, the Bangor PD officially initiated the process of reclassifying Elena Ward's case as a cold case. This decision was made after the Maine Investigation Board reviewed all materials in the file and concluded that no active leads remained worth pursuing. In the internal report, the unit commander explicitly noted that all available resources had been deployed: ground searches, expanded geographic scope, timeline analysis, exit route checks, inventory of personal belongings, legal assessments, and tip verification, but the case could not advance even one step further. As a result, the full-time investigative team was withdrawn from the case, and follow-up responsibility was transferred to the Maine State Police Cold Case Unit, the specialized unit that handles long-term missing persons or suspected homicide cases, with no new developments over many years. Elena Ward's file was classified under Category B, Unresolved Missing Adult, in the cold case system, meaning the case involved unusual circumstances but lacked sufficient legal grounds to classify it as a criminal offense. From the moment of transfer, the disappearance was no longer treated as an active daily investigation, but became a file under passive monitoring status. The cold case unit would only review it again upon the emergence of new leads, new analytical technology, or when an assigned investigator conducted periodic reviews. This transition did not mean closing the case. Rather, it marked a shift from active status to information preservation status, awaiting a possible reactivation opportunity. All related physical evidence continued to be preserved, but since the case was not classified as a criminal investigation, no further forensic actions or trace collection were performed. Legally, Elena's file could only be reopened upon the appearance of new physical evidence or new testimony strong enough to alter the fundamental nature of the case. This meant that all requests for deeper examination of the Lexus vehicle, the garage, electronic devices in the home, or any related property continued to be stalled, as the cold case unit lacked authority to automatically expand search scope without probable cause. In the Maine State Police reporting system, Elena's file was placed on the quarterly review list, but in practice this amounted only to checking NCIC updates for matching identities, matching fingerprints, or connections to any unidentified remains in the New England region. The results of these checks were consistently negative. Thus, by the end of 2008, Elena Ward's disappearance officially entered the cold case phase, existing in a prolonged state of silence, with no leads, no investigative direction, and no progress, waiting only for a new signal that could potentially change the entire situation. By early 2016, Elena Ward's file had remained in cold case status for 8 years, with very little prospect of reactivation, until an incidental event at a private storage facility on the outskirts of Bangor created the first major turning point since her disappearance. The owner of Pine Ridge Self-Storage contacted Bangor PD in March after repossessing several long-abandoned units and discovering a large box labeled with the name Elena Ward inside a unit that had been past due since late 2005. More significantly, the facility owner stated that the unit had been rented under the name Lucas Ward, but no payments or visits had occurred since the contract expired just a few months after the disappearance. Per facility policy, they only open units after a minimum of 5 years of delinquency with no response from the renter. While preparing the unit for auction liquidation, the owner noticed a single cardboard box placed against the interior wall, unusual compared to the typical accumulated belongings of long-term delinquent renters. Recognizing the victim's name on the box label, the owner halted processing and decided to notify police before any items were moved. Because this was property under the control of a person directly connected to the disappearance, and because the unit had never been checked during the initial investigation, the cold case unit determined they had authority to take possession of the items under regulations governing evidence related to open files. When the investigative team arrived at the facility, they documented the unit's condition No signs of forced entry, no evidence of tampering, and the cardboard box showed no signs of disturbance, indicating it had remained there undisturbed since the original rental period. The facility owner confirmed that the unit was rented in October 2005, 2 months before Elena disappeared, and no entry or exit activity had been recorded after early 2006. The investigative team photographed the entire scene before removing the box to Cold Case Unit headquarters. Opening the box followed strict chain of custody procedures to preserve any potential traces. Inside the box, investigators found numerous personal items neatly organized, including handwritten letters, various personal documents such as old medical records, printed work documents from emails, several personal planners, schedule notebooks from 2004 and 2005, several pages printed about family financial matters, and an envelope containing documents that the family confirmed they had never seen before. What drew the investigators' attention most was not the quantity of documents, but their nature. The majority did not match the materials the family had previously turned over in 2005, and many contained content related to Elena's sensitive personal issues that had never appeared in the original file. Some documents were printouts from Elena's personal email account, yet the original emails no longer existed in the email account that police examined in 2005. This indicated the documents had been printed before her disappearance, but were not present in the home when police conducted their search. The discovery of new documents in a previously unknown storage unit created a major shift in the legal assessment. Although the precise investigative value of each document could not yet be determined, the existence of a secret storage location directly connected to the victim constituted new information sufficient to meet the legal standard of newly discovered evidence for reactivating a cold case investigation. Additionally, the fact that the unit was rented in Elena Ward's name required investigators to examine why Elena's personal documents had been hidden in a place unknown to any family member. Investigators noted that this was the first time since 2008 that an unaccounted-for element had emerged, an item belonging to the victim outside the original search scope and undisclosed for 8 full years. According to Maine State Police regulations, any personal item of the victim that had never been searched but could relate to behavior prior to the disappearance was sufficient grounds to reopen the file. In the report submitted to command, the cold case unit stated that the appearance of a previously unexamined set of documents in the Elena Ward disappearance constituted a change in investigative conditions, providing sufficient basis to move the file from passive monitoring to active reevaluation status. This did not equate to upgrading the case to a criminal investigation, but it was the necessary step to restart the full review and analysis process. The documents in the box, though not yet evaluated in detail for content, met the required legal threshold. New evidence directly related to the victim, never accessed during the initial investigation, and capable of altering the understanding of pre-disappearance behavior. The final evaluation report was signed in April 2016, and Elena's file was officially marked eligible for reactivation review, paving the way for a comprehensive re-examination of the entire case after 8 years of silence. After the box of Elena's personal documents was discovered in the storage unit in 2016, and the case officially became eligible for reactivation, the cold case unit began a complete re-review of all original data from 2005, including the VHS tapes collected from neighbors during the early investigation phase. When the case was fresh, police had viewed the tapes only in analog format, mainly with the naked eye on CRT monitors, as the forensic capabilities of 2005 did not allow for image enhancement, stabilization, or noise filtering techniques. Many tapes were then labeled "no investigative value" due to low light, poor visibility, snow covering the lens, or cameras positioned too far from the Ward residence. However, with the emergence of new evidence, the cold case unit set out to re-examine all VHS tapes using modern digital technology capable of recovering details invisible to the naked eye. The first step was to retrieve all surviving copies from the Bangor PD evidence storage. A total of 17 VHS tapes from neighboring homes were collected, most recorded by older generation outdoor porch or garage security cameras. After more than a decade, many tapes had deteriorated, showing mold, noise, and blurring from snow directly hitting the lens. Nevertheless, the Cold Case Unit technical team proceeded to digitize each frame, using new image processing software that allowed brightness enhancement without destroying pixel structure, VHS grain noise removal, contrast balancing, and motion-based stabilization. Digitization was prioritized for tapes whose timestamps overlapped the critical time window from 9:30 p.m. on December 14th to 6:30 a.m. on December 15th. One tape previously marked "not useful" in 2005 belonged to a residence approximately 130 feet from the Ward home, with a camera angled diagonally that inadvertently captured a portion of the rear edge of the Ward backyard. The 2005 image was extremely dark, showing mostly gray noise and a few bright specks of snow. But after digitization and multi-layer brightness enhancement, investigators observed a blurred motion sequence around 4:52–5:10 a.m. In the original footage, the motion appeared only as an indistinct dark mass changing position. However, modern multi-layer enhancement algorithms highlighted linear shapes and consistent motion trajectories. Technicians paused frame by frame, analyzed motion boundaries, and determined the image resembled a person dragging a long object across the backyard. Though still blurry, the footage was sufficient to distinguish between a person walking with both hands held in front of the body versus walking empty-handed. The man in the footage wore a hat, and his build matched Lucas Ward's height and physique as documented in 2005 identification records. The slightly hunched posture, tensed shoulders, and backward-leaning force indicated he was dragging a weighted object. The dragged object had an elongated shape, longer than a human body, narrow in width, and its outline was softened by drifting snow. Motion analysis showed the object sliding across the snow surface, creating a shallow track visible as a long dark streak for about 3 seconds before fresh snowfall covered it again. With increased contrast, investigators determined the object was neither a box, plank, nor gardening equipment. It appeared soft, with slight elasticity when the leading edge struck uneven ground, and exhibited gentle swaying with each pull. This characteristic ruled out inanimate rigid objects, such as wood or construction materials. Although the footage could not definitively identify the object's nature, its linear shape and swaying motion raised a major question: why would Lucas be dragging a long object across the backyard at around 5 a.m. on the very night his wife disappeared, when he claimed Elena walked out at dawn? Another notable detail was the direction of movement. The footage showed the man dragging the object from near the garage exit toward the pine woods behind the property, following the exact rear access path that no neighbor's camera or street view covered, the only route out of sight. After initial digitization, the technical team performed a second round of enhancement, focusing on color noise filtering and motion edge sharpening. This time, the leading edge of the object showed clearer sagging with each pull, not rigid like a solid object. The motion was described as being dragged, not self-supporting. When ground level brightness was increased, the drag track in the snow became more visible than in the 2005 original. Technicians measured the drag track width at approximately 18–22 inches, consistent with the width of an adult human body. The track was continuous without the intermittent marks typical of dragging heavy, angular, rigid objects. This led experts to rule out items such as cabinets, chests, or benches, which would produce segmented contact marks. Another technical point analyzed was the man's gait. When playback speed was increased, investigators noted that his feet maintained a balanced, weighted stance, consistent with pulling a real heavy object rather than a fake or lightly staged pull. The degree of sliding on the snow surface reflected a combination of pulling force and gravity, producing shallow but uniform depression. This indicated an object of moderate weight that was not excessively heavy, and most critically, the shape and motion were consistent with a soft, elongated object, roughly the length of a human body. When the investigative team compared the enhanced imagery with Lucas's 2005 statement, a glaring inconsistency emerged. He claimed he slept from around 11 p.m. until 6 a.m., except for waking at an unclear time, yet the footage showed a person matching his physical description moving in the backyard before 5:10 a.m. Furthermore, if Lucas had dragged anything toward the rear woods, this directly contradicted his claim of leaving the house by car at 5:59 a.m., without mentioning any prior activity. The digitized imagery could not be considered direct evidence of a crime, but it was sufficient for the cold case unit to assess the strong possibility of concealment behavior on the night Elena disappeared. Something completely undetected in 2005 due to severe technological limitations. The VHS digitization produced the first visual lead, capable of altering the nature of the case after more than a decade in cold case status. After the VHS footage was digitized and revealed images of a man whose build matched Lucas dragging a long object across the backyard between approximately 4:52 5:10 a.m. On December 15, 2005, the cold case unit shifted focus to an important data source overlooked during the initial investigation, the integrated navigation system in the family's 2005 Lexus RX 330. At the time of Elena's disappearance, retrieving GPS data from civilian vehicles was not common, and the navigation systems in early 2000s Lexus models were regarded solely as driver assistance tools without forensic extraction interfaces. Back then, police lacked both the tools and legal basis to remove the device, so the vehicle was only visually inspected and quickly returned to the family. But by 2016, the cold case unit recognized that older vehicle manufacturers stored residual navigation history and internal memory as residual data, a small amount of information about previously entered or temporarily saved destinations. Automotive forensic technology had advanced significantly, enabling data extraction from navigation systems not originally designed for this purpose. This was an opportunity unavailable to the 2005 investigation. The cold case unit contacted an automotive forensics specialist from Massachusetts State Police, who had previously recovered GPS data in a 2014 case. The expert confirmed that the 2005 Lexus RX 330 system was capable of retaining temporary position data in ROM memory, including coordinates accessed when users entered destinations or when the system automatically saved the last known stop for return route assistance. With the new legal status, Elena Ward's file having been reactivated due to the storage unit discovery, the cold case unit obtained a seizure warrant for the vehicle to extract navigation data, as the vehicle could contain latent evidence never previously examined. Lucas remained the registered owner, but the warrant was approved under the standard of newly discovered investigative opportunity. Once the vehicle was brought into the forensics lab, the central control unit was carefully removed to access the ROM memory. The device was connected to a specialized reader, and all data was extracted as coordinate codes. Among more than 400 mixed data strings, mostly home, work, supermarket, and familiar locations, technicians quickly identified a series of coordinates located outside the Bangor area, specifically a chain of points leading northwest into Maine, near the border of Penobscot County. One group of coordinates was system timestamped to the morning of December 15, 2005, aligning precisely with the neighbor's camera recording the Lexus leaving the Ward residence at 5:59 a.m. Using the route guidance chain, the system reconstructed the journey with high accuracy. The vehicle left the Bangor neighborhood, traveled along Route 15 toward Dexter, then turned onto a series of rural roads leading to deep forest area not far from Seaboas Lake. This was not a commute route, shopping trip, or any routine activity of Lucas. Another significant finding was the system's automatic save of the final destination at the time the vehicle was shut off. This destination was located less than 1 mile from Seaboas Lake, on an old logging road not used as a public route. The location appeared multiple times in the residual data, indicating it had been manually entered or automatically recorded when the vehicle approached the area. When the coordinates were plotted on modern mapping systems, the cold case unit identified 3 high suspicion hotspots along the southern edge of Seaboas Lake. a clearing formerly used as a log staging area, an abandoned logging road segment right at the forest edge, and a low-lying area leading down to the water's edge. Investigators paid particular attention to the third location, as the terrain there allowed a vehicle to stop discreetly, and winter snow and rain could quickly erase traces. When cross-referencing the GPS data with findings from the digitized VHS footage, the connection became striking yet clear. If Lucas was the man in the footage, and if the long object dragged across the backyard was a substantial weighted object, then leaving the house by vehicle and traveling to a remote forest area, the same morning opened an entirely new line of analysis. The GPS route also showed the vehicle stopping at least twice, based on detected satellite signal state changes, although exact stop durations were not recorded. However, the final stop coordinate was located near the junction of an old logging road and a footpath leading directly down to a small bay of Seaboas Lake. The location was relatively secluded, no residences, no security cameras, and in 2005, it was an area with very little winter traffic. When the cold case unit reconstructed the full route map, they determined the journey lasted more than 2 hours, consistent with camera footage showing Lucas leaving shortly before 6 a.m. and returning sometime later in the morning. The GPS did not record the return time because the older system only saved destinations when manually entered or when auto route functions were triggered. However, by cross-referencing camera timestamps of departure and first reappearance at the Ward residence, analysts could chain the timeline. One final notable detail in the GPS data was the presence of several user manually bookmarked points, something 90% of 2005 vehicle owners never utilized. Among them was a short mark point labeled PN4, not an address, suggesting user-defined coding. PN4 corresponded exactly to the junction of the logging road and the path down to the lake. The fact that Lucas had never mentioned any trip in that direction in his statements placed this point at the top of the high suspicion category. Investigators created a comprehensive map from Bangor to Seaboas Lake, marking every stop turn and the entire surrounding area of the final destination. This analysis marked the first time since 2005 that independent data proved the Lexus had traveled to a remote forest area on the very morning Elena disappeared. A fact entirely undetected in the initial phase due to lack of technology. With the GPS data, combined with the VHS digitization results and Lucas's anomalous behavior, the cold case unit concluded that the navigation system had opened the first concrete investigative avenue, the morning journey of December 15, 2005, leading directly to an isolated area around Seaboas Lake, and that became the single most important high suspicion hotspot since Elena Ward vanished. After the GPS data from the Lexus showed Lucas's unusual trip toward the deep forest area near Seaboas Lake on the morning of December 15, 2005, the cold case unit continued to expand its review of previously overlooked sources of information, particularly witness statements. It was during this re-evaluation phase that an unexpected development emerged. A witness who had lived near the Ward residence in 2005 and who had moved out of Maine more than 10 years earlier, returned to Bangor to visit family and proactively contacted authorities to provide information he believed should have been reported long ago. The man, recorded in the file under the initials JH, had lived in a house 1 lot away from the Wards, but moved to Pennsylvania by the end of 2006. When Elena's disappearance resurfaced in local media in 2016, following the storage unit development, JH realized that what he had heard on the night of December 14, 2005, could be directly related to the case, and he decided to return to Maine to give an official statement. During his interview with the cold case unit, JH stated that on the night of the disappearance, he was up late in the living room due to insomnia, and around 10 p.m. he heard a series of unusual sounds coming from the direction of the Ward house. At the time, there was strong wind and heavy snowfall, which distorted and muffled the sounds, making them difficult to identify clearly. However, according to his description, the noises had a distinct rhythm, resembling the sounds of two people struggling or wrestling in an enclosed space. He described the sounds as scraping feet, objects striking walls or floors, and particularly a sudden low, heavy thud, which he said sounded like a person slamming hard onto the floor. What made this sound memorable to him over the years was that it did not resemble ordinary objects falling. He said he almost stepped out onto the porch to look, but because of the bad weather and thinking it might just be storm-related noise, he did not take further action. The timing of the sounds he heard coincided with the 10:05 p.m. mark, the exact time Elena's phone lost connection, a detail the cold case unit only discovered after re-examining the original data in 2016. This was a highly significant match, as it added an independent layer of information about activity inside the house, precisely at the moment the victim was believed to have stopped using her phone. When asked why he had not reported it to police in 2005, Jay explained that the disappearance was only just beginning at that point, and the news reports made no mention of any suspected physical altercation. He thought the noises were random sounds amplified by the weather. After moving out of Maine, he did not continue following the case. It was only upon returning to visit family in 2016 and reading articles about the case being reopened that the memory of those sounds returned vividly. The investigative team further assessed the reliability of the statement by cross-referencing the location of his former residence, the wooden wall structure, wind direction, and actual distance. Based on maps, J.A.'s house was within audible range of the Ward living room when the wind was blowing southeast, as recorded in the weather data that night. Hearing sounds during a blizzard was not unusual, as his house was located near the side passageway of the Ward residence, a spot that could act as a sound funnel, amplifying noises from inside. The cold case unit confirmed that the sounds as described by J.A. could not be definitively classified, but the struggling nature he described matched remarkably well with the timing of Elena's phone going offline, and the unexplained timeline gap from 9:58 to 10:15 p.m. that investigators had previously been unable to account for. J.H.'s statement was not only documented, but formally entered into the file as a supplemental witness statement, a type of additional testimony used in cold cases when new witnesses come forward, or when prior witnesses provide previously unreported details. Although it could not be considered direct evidence that a crime occurred, the statement held substantial value in supporting the accumulated data. The sequence of sounds aligned with the argument that Elena's disappearance was not a voluntary departure, reinforcing suspicion that an unusual event took place inside the house on the night of December 14th. Another detail noted by the team was the consistency in J.H.'s account. Throughout the interview, he did not exaggerate, nor did he make absolute claims about the nature of the sounds. He simply described them from memory, which is consistent with the behavior of truthful witnesses. Additionally, he had no personal connection to the Ward family, no motive to fabricate information, and was not seeking attention. The investigative team rated this statement as highly credible within the scope of delayed eyewitness evidence. The recording of J.H.'s statement was considered a significant step because it added auditory data to a critical time window, a period that previously relied solely on inference from the phone data and Elena's lack of activity. With this statement, the cold case unit officially updated the file, marking another shift in the assessment of the case's nature. Sounds resembling a struggle, occurring precisely when Elena's personal devices ceased activity, providing grounds for deeper evaluation of the events of the night she disappeared. After the supplemental witness statement from J.H. regarding struggle-like sounds around 10 p.m. on December 14, 2005, was entered into the record, the cold case unit determined that this data, combined with findings from the VHS and GPS, met the new legal standard, allowing for an expanded forensic search of the Ward residence, something that had not been possible in 2005 due to lack of probable cause. The search warrant was approved, limited to the main bedroom and adjacent hallway, areas where Elena was believed to have last been, based on phone data. The cold case-oriented search required techniques involving the removal of old drywall layers to check for micro-evidence, possibly trapped within the wall structure, a method commonly used in violent crimes with no visible surface evidence. The forensic team arrived at the Ward residence in the morning, mapped the scene, measured furniture positions, and marked suspected impact areas based on JH sound analysis and the 2005 report of a small, previously dismissed scratch on the wall. Forensics used a flat surface scanner to identify areas of abnormal density in the drywall, revealing sections that had been previously impacted. At a height of approximately 4 feet from the floor, on the right side wall beside the bed, the scanner detected an anomaly, a deeper compression mark in the drywall compared to surrounding areas, possibly the result of a heavy impact. The surface removal procedure was performed by cutting small square sections to avoid destroying the entire structure. When the drywall layer came away, the forensic team discovered fine dust behind it, along with numerous tiny fragments of material adhered within the substrate. Using specialized adhesive tape, they collected micro samples and recovered multiple tiny fibers in light gray and pale blue colors, different from both the wall color and the room's bedding fabrics. These fibers were placed in evidence bags and preliminarily analyzed under optical microscopy on site. Initial results showed a polyester-cotton blend structure consistent with the fabric of the sweaters Elena commonly wore in winter, based on previously provided family photographs. Forensically, the fibers could not identify an individual, but their presence inside the wall in significant quantity raised concern. Fibers could only become embedded in drywall through forceful contact between a body and the wall surface. Below the cutout area, forensics also discovered a horizontal indentation, approximately 4 inches long, not deep enough to be visible to the naked eye, but clear under low-angle lighting. The indentation ran sideways, indicating lateral rather than vertical force application, a characteristic commonly seen in body impacts from being shoved or pushed forcefully. When the examination was extended to the opposite wall, near the bedroom doorway edge, forensics found a faint vertical crack about 6 inches long, running through the drywall, covered by a newer layer of paint. This paint layer was determined to have been applied after December 2005, based on color and oxidation analysis. This led the team to include in the report the possibility that the wall had undergone quick repair after the night of the disappearance. Forensics continued, collecting dust samples from behind the drywall in the cracked area, and found additional thinner white cream-colored fibers consistent with the cotton material of the nightwear Elena typically wore at home. Under microscopy, these fibers showed stretching and breakage consistent with strong pulling force, a type of fiber damage typical of friction during a physical struggle. The forensic team also used body fluid detection lighting, but found no blood on the wall surface. However, this did not rule out a struggle, as blunt force impacts do not necessarily produce visible blood. More importantly, the compression marks and indentations in the drywall were consistent with body impact patterns, particularly involving the head or shoulder area. When forensics compared the compression locations with Elena's average height, the positions aligned with areas that would make contact if she had been forcefully pushed into the wall or restrained during a struggle. Additionally, the team inspected the interior wall studs. One stud showed fresher scratches than the surrounding wood, with angled marks running downward, suggesting impact from a narrow-edged hard object. While the exact nature of the object could not be determined, it indicated external force applied to the wall structure rather than natural settling. Forensics also examined the baseboard near the suspected struggle area and found a small scuff mark on the baseboard paint, about 2 inches above the floor, consistent with heel or foot drag marks from someone being pulled, losing balance, or kicking in resistance. The investigative team included comparative photographs in the report, matching the marks to simulations of body movements during restraint, pushing, or dragging. The results showed a logical sequence: the high wall crack consistent with strong impact, the horizontal indentation consistent with shoulder or back striking the wall, embedded fibers consistent with clothing under pressure, and the baseboard scuff consistent with dragging or kicking resistance. All findings were consistent with J.H.'s witness account of struggle sounds heard through the storm at the precise time Elena's phone disconnected. This was the first time since 2005 that physical evidence emerged, supporting the possibility of a physical altercation in the bedroom, evidence completely undetectable to the naked eye during the initial investigation. The Cold Case Unit recorded this discovery in the file as the first physical evidence indicating a forceful impact in the bedroom on the night Elena disappeared. After completing the forensic analysis of the bedroom walls and documenting the sequence of marks consistent with a struggle, the Cold Case Unit officially entered the phase of reconstructing the full timeline using a 3D model, incorporating all new data collected since 2016, including digitized VHS footage, Lexus GPS track, supplemental witness statements, and wall impact evidence. The goal was to reconstruct the most probable sequence of movements that occurred during the night of December 14th into the early morning of December 15th, 2005, to establish the order of events and reconcile previously broken timeline segments in the original record. The 3D timeline model was built by simulating the Ward residence structure from crime scene drawings, the bedroom located on the west side, adjacent to the hallway leading to the living room. The bedroom window slightly open on the night of the disappearance, the bedroom door approximately 6 feet from the wall where fibers were found, the backyard area directly outside the rear door, leading straight to the sparse northern tree line. Based on phone data, the team marked 9:58 to 10:05 p.m. as the last time Elena's device was active. Immediately afterward came an unusual period of complete silence lasting the entire night. From J.H.'s statement, the 10 o'clock, 10:10 p.m. window was incorporated as the period when struggle sounds emanated from the Ward residence. When these two datasets were combined, the 3D model highlighted the intersection between the phone deactivation time and the witness-heard struggle sounds, making the probability of an unusual event in the bedroom at that moment extremely high. Based on the forensic results, the 3D model reconstructed impacts by identifying two wall locations with marks consistent with a human body being forcefully pushed into the surface. The horizontal indentation at shoulder height and the higher crack corresponding to the head area. Mechanical calculations of force direction indicated the impact came from the direction of the bedroom entrance, not from the bed, meaning the movement pattern was consistent with a struggle beginning near the bedroom doorway. In the first simulation, the 3D model placed Elena near the end of the bed, then simulated a sudden impact, causing her to rapidly back into the right side wall. The force was calculated based on Elena's average height and weight, and the position of the indentations. The resulting motion trajectory matched to the location of fiber embedding in the drywall. This reinforced the conclusion that Elena's clothing had made direct forceful contact with the wall. The team then simulated the second phase of movement based on the baseboard scuff. The model calculated the likelihood of the victim attempting to brace or resist being dragged with her feet, producing the low-level scuff near the floor. This was consistent with the direction and position of the mark. In the 3D simulation, after wall impact, the victim's body was pulled sideways toward the door, correctly recreating the logic of the crack on the opposite wall. After reconstructing the sequence of movements in the bedroom, the Cold Case Unit moved to the next segment of the timeline, from 10:15 p.m. to 4:50 a.m., a period during which the neighbor's camera recorded no movement, but behavioral data and the condition of the house in 2005 indicated no departure by Elena. The 3D model, based on forensic and witness data, marked this as the victim inactivity phase, while simulating a high probability of internal movement within the house after the struggle. The model then shifted to the 4:52, 5:10 a.m. timeframe, based on enhanced VHS camera footage. The team assigned the figure in the video to a character model with height and weight parameters matching Lucas, then reconstructed the movement trajectory across the backyard. The simulation used pixel motion data to determine gait, arm position, and pulling force. The model showed the man in the footage dragging a long object across the snow, length consistent with an adult human body, with a slight rocking motion and flexibility consistent with a non-rigid object. The calculated trajectory showed the drag heading directly toward the trail leading into the tree line. This perfectly matched the actual 2005 backyard terrain, as the neighbor's camera covered only a partial corner of the yard. The next step in the timeline model was inputting the Lexus GPS track. The data showed the vehicle leaving the residence at 5:59 a.m., heading towards Sebois Lake. The team reconstructed the 3D route, allowing visualization of terrain angles, logging road inclines, and potential stopping points where tire tracks would be difficult to detect in snow. Upon completion of this simulation, one high-probability stop was marked at the intersection of the logging road and lake access path, coinciding with PN4, the manually entered code in the navigation system. The 3D model continued to recreate the phase where, according to GPS data, the vehicle may have remained stationary for several minutes or longer at the suspect hotspot. Using blizzard data from December 15th, the team determined snow accumulation was sufficient to obliterate traces within 1–2 hours. Thus, the simulation indicated that any activity at that location in the early morning would leave no detectable ground evidence even if searched days later. When all data were merged into a linear 3D timeline, the cold case unit marked 6 key events with high correspondence: 9:58, 10:05 p.m. Elena's phone ceases activity. Struggle sounds from witness JH. Bedroom wall impact marks consistent with body collision. 2:10:05 p.m., 4:50 a.m. No personal device activity. No evidence of departure. High likelihood victim was no longer capable of movement. 3:4:52, 5:10 a.m. VHS camera captures figure dragging, long object across backyard. 3D motion model identifies figure consistent with Lucas. 4:59 a.m. Lexus departs residence. Camera confirmation. 5 approximately 6 o'clock. 8 a.m. GPS data reconstructs. Journey to Sebois Lake area. Destination matches remote logging road location. 6 after 8 a.m. Vehicle returns to Bangor. No evidence of Elena leaving the residence by any route prior. The final 3D simulation presented, for the first time since 2005, a seamless sequence of events. A struggle in the bedroom at the time the phone went dead. Mysterious movement in the backyard at dawn. The vehicle's journey to a remote forest area, just hours later. And the complete disappearance of the victim with no surface evidence left behind. Upon completion of the 3D timeline report, the investigators noted in the file that this represented the highest probability model, based on all newly acquired data. Although the report did not reach a legal conclusion about the nature of the events, it provided the tightest chronological framework the investigation had ever achieved, and a clear foundation for the next steps toward determining the truth behind a disappearance that had lasted more than a decade. After completing the 3D timeline model and identifying the 6 key milestones that align with all the new data, the cold case unit moved to the most critical step before being able to seek an arrest warrant. Building a seamless chain of evidence that meets the legal standard of probable cause under Maine law. In the past, the lack of direct evidence had caused the case to stall, but now, with the digitized VHS footage, recovered GPS data, additional witness statements, and forensic traces from the bedroom wall, the investigative team for the first time possessed all the pieces needed to connect behavior, time, physical evidence, technical data into a logical, cohesive, and legally weighty chain. This linkage was constructed across 4 layers. 1. The timeline layer, 2. The behavior layer, 3. The physical evidence layer, and 4. The technical data layer. The first layer, the timeline, was established from the new findings. Elena's phone ceased activity at 10:05 p.m. A witness heard sounds of a struggle at the same time. Wall impact marks consistent with a physical altercation occurring between 9:58, 10:10 p.m. A human silhouette dragging an object across the backyard appeared between 4:52, 5:10 a.m. The Lexus left the house at 5:59 a.m. GPS data showed the journey to Sebois Lake, from 6 o'clock to approximately 8 a.m. The vehicle returned to Bangor afterward. When all these time points were placed side by side, none contradicted each other. On the contrary, they formed a continuous sequence: indoor incident dragging an object, leaving the house by vehicle, arrival at a remote wooded area. For the first time since 2005, the entire dataset could be assembled into a unified gap-free timeline. The second layer, the behavior chain, involved evaluating Lucas's reactions, statements, and actions against the objective data. Many behavioral markers were identified as anomalous. The claim that Elena went for a walk at dawn was inconsistent with sunrise time, weather conditions, intact snow cover, and the fact that all her personal belongings were left behind in the house. Lucas's failure to call police immediately, his departure from the house before 6 a.m., without mentioning any prior activity, the existence of a storage unit in his name containing Elena's personal papers unknown to her family, and his vague explanation of the night of the disappearance were all subjected to behavioral analysis. When comparing Lucas's 2005 statements with the new data, the cold case unit noted at least 4 internal contradictions. He claimed he slept all night, yet the camera captured a figure matching his build, dragging an object in the yard. He said Elena left the house on foot, yet no footprints were found. He offered no reason for the vehicle's trip to Sebois Lake, and he denied using the storage unit, even though records showed he rented it shortly before Elena disappeared. Each contradiction became a link in the chain of deviant behavior. The third layer, physical evidence chain, included all material traces. Fabric fibers matching Elena's clothing embedded in the drywall compound. A horizontal dent in the wall consistent with body impact force. Low baseboard scuff marks consistent with dragging struggle. Paint cracks that had been painted over after the disappearance. Drag marks in the snow captured on VHS, and the complete absence of exit footprints despite snow conditions that would have preserved them for only a few minutes. Forensic experts concluded that the bedroom traces could not have resulted from an ordinary accident or normal household activity, but were only consistent with a violent struggle. The fact that the marks were beneath the drywall layer indicated that subsequent repairs had attempted to conceal them. This body of physical evidence formed the foundation supporting the violent nature of the incident. The fourth layer, the technical data chain, consisted of objective tamper-proof evidence, in-vehicle GPS imagery, digitized VHS data, phone activity logs showing cessation, route mapping, and weather data. All were independent of one another, collected from different sources, and analyzed with modern technology. Critically, each technical source, though independent, corroborated the others. GPS confirmed the trip to Sebois Lake. VHS confirmed early morning backyard activity. The figure in the VHS matched the timing of vehicle departure. Phone data aligned with the struggle sounds, and wall forensics aligned with the device shutdown time. When the 4 layers were combined, the cold case unit constructed an evidence chain with 6 logical connection points. 1. A physical altercation occurred in the bedroom around 10 p.m. based on forensics and witness testimony. 2. Elena did not leave the house after that time based on snow data and personal belongings. 3. There was activity involving dragging a large object across the backyard at dawn based on VHS. 4. The person dragging the object had height and gait consistent with Lucas. 5. Lucas's Lexus left the house shortly afterward and traveled to a remote location. 6. No data of any kind showed Elena alive after 10 p.m. This 6-point chain constitutes what the law calls a corroborated circumstantial nexus, a series of indirect but mutually supporting pieces of evidence that rule out coincidence. The legal principle for probable cause does not require direct evidence, such as a body or an eyewitness to violence. It requires a reasonable, consistent chain of evidence capable of making an objective investigator believe a crime occurred and that the suspect was involved. The cold case unit tested each link against this standard. Without an altercation, the fabric fibers could not be embedded in the drywall. If Elena left voluntarily, there should have been footprints or items taken. If Lucas was uninvolved, the VHS figure and GPS journey would have a reasonable explanation. If no cover-up occurred, the wall would not have needed repainting. Instead, every element pointed to the same conclusion. The evidence chain was finalized when the technical team created a cause-and-effect chain graph, with each fact tagged by source and arranged along a timeline axis. The graph demonstrated tight interconnections, struggle sound wall marks, Elena's loss of contact, object dragging activity, vehicle departure, journey to remote site, no further signs of life. When presenting the evidence chain in the internal report, the Cold Case Unit commander wrote that, for the first time since 2005, the case file fully satisfied the probable cause requirement to seek an arrest warrant for the primary suspect. The chain not only completely eliminated the two previous scenarios, but also established a unified cause and effect pathway between the indoor event and the early morning behavior. Furthermore, the consistency across independent sources, old witnesses, forensics, camera, GPS, elevated its probative value to a level sufficient for presentation to the prosecutor. With the evidence chain completed, the Cold Case Unit now possessed a solid legal framework to move the case to the next phase, preparing documents to seek an arrest warrant based on a tightly linked, non-contradictory chain of evidence. After the evidence chain was completed and confirmed to meet the probable cause standard, the Cold Case Unit immediately coordinated with the Penobscot County District Attorney's Office to prepare the arrest warrant application for Lucas Ward, identified as the sole suspect, directly connected to all nodal points in the reconstructed timeline. The affidavit presented to the judge included the bedroom wall forensic report, enhanced VHS footage showing a figure dragging an object across the backyard, GPS data proving the mysterious journey to the remote area of Sebois Lake on the morning after the disappearance, supplemental witness testimony about struggle sounds, and analysis completely ruling out the possibility that the victim left voluntarily. The report also highlighted the contradictions between Lucas's 2005 statements and the technical data obtained after the case was reopened, particularly his assertion that he slept all night, while the camera recorded movement in the backyard consistent with his build. The prosecutor presented the evidence chain in a cause and effect structure, arguing that none of the elements could be reasonably explained without Lucas's involvement, and that the linkage between behavior, timing, physical evidence, and technical data formed a firm foundation for concluding his direct involvement in Elena's disappearance. A closed probable cause hearing was held at Bangor District Court, where the judge received the more than 300-page file and reviewed the core components of the 3D timeline model. The judge paid particular attention to the GPS data, bedroom impact marks, and VHS footage, as these were independent yet powerfully corroborative pieces of evidence. After more than 2 hours of review, the judge concluded that the probable cause standard had been met, that there was sufficient basis to believe a violent crime had occurred on the night of December 14, 2005, and that Lucas Ward was highly likely to be responsible. The arrest warrant was signed that same afternoon, effective statewide in Maine. Immediately afterward, the Cold Case Unit and Maine State Police executed a low-profile apprehension plan to minimize the risk of Lucas fleeing or destroying evidence. The apprehension team determined that Lucas had moved away from Bangor years earlier and was now living in Fairfield, working at a local garage. On an early morning in late June 2019, the arrest team split into two units. One conducted distant surveillance to observe Lucas's routine, while the other waited for the signal to move in. When Lucas left his residence on foot toward his truck, the team performed a soft contact approach, advancing from the front, announcing the warrant, and instructing him to place his hands on the hood. Lucas was completely surprised and showed no resistance. Investigators immediately handcuffed him, read the Miranda warning, and transported him to Maine State Police Headquarters in Augusta for initial processing. In the arrest report, the team leader noted that Lucas maintained a flat expression, did not ask why he was being arrested, did not immediately request an attorney, and displayed no clear emotional reaction. This was recorded in the file as a behavioral indicator requiring further analysis, as he showed no surprise at the investigator's appearance more than 14 years after Elena's disappearance. The warrant was reaffirmed at headquarters shortly after Lucas's arrival, concluding the years-long search phase and officially opening the next stage of the case, interrogation of the suspect in the context of a fully systematized, legally compliant evidence chain. Immediately after Lucas Ward was brought to Maine State Police Headquarters in Augusta, the Cold Case Unit's interrogation team began an intensive questioning process employing continuous confrontation tactics designed to force the suspect to confront the entire body of irrefutable data. The interrogation room was set up as a controlled environment, neutral lighting, no direct pressure, but sufficient to observe micro-reactions, fixed table and chairs, cameras capturing both face and hand movements, with 2 investigators present, one leading the active approach, the other observing reactions and tracking stress levels over time. In the initial phase, Lucas remained passive, sitting upright but not tense, giving short answers and showing no emotion. He insisted he knew nothing about Elena's disappearance, repeating the old story that she went for a walk at dawn and that he didn't see anything else. The interrogation team allowed him to speak uninterrupted, carefully documenting every detail of his statement to prepare for later confrontation. As Lucas maintained a steady voice and avoided emotional description, the first investigator shifted to the objective fact confrontation phase, beginning by showing several enhanced images from the VHS camera. This was the first moment Lucas changed posture. He glanced briefly at the screen, then immediately turned his face away. The interrogator did not force him to look but simply asked, "Do you know who the person in this video is?" Lucas replied that the image was too blurry, unclear, and could be anyone. The investigator did not challenge him immediately, instead moving to the GPS data. A line plot route map was placed in front of him, marked with the Lexus leaving the house at 5:59 a.m. and traveling to Seboeis Lake. Lucas stuck to his explanation, "I just drove around to clear my head." At this point, the second investigator stepped in as the reality restorer, placing the bedroom forensic printout in front of Lucas, pointing out the wall dent location, low baseboard scuff marks, and fabric fibers matching Elena's clothing type. Lucas began showing increased hand movements, shifting feet, clear signs of stress. He avoided all questions about the bedroom and repeatedly stated, "I don't know anything about that stuff." The lead investigator then shifted to a combined confrontation tactic, placing all 3 data groups side by side and asking Lucas to explain why 3 independent sources all pointed to the same scenario. Lucas became visibly flustered and began changing his story. He said he did go downstairs to the kitchen that night, walked around the house, then maybe was dragging something in the yard, but doesn't remember. This shift in statement was recorded as the first major psychological break. The team continued expanding the confrontation with the full 3D timeline presentation, 10:05 p.m. Elena's phone shuts off, 4:52 a.m., figure dragging a long object, 5:59 a.m. Vehicle departs, 6:40, 7:30, journey to remote forest area. Lucas could no longer maintain his earlier calm state. When asked why Elena would leave without her wallet, keys, phone, or coat in sub-zero temperatures, Lucas offered no reasonable answer, only repeating she could have just left. The interrogation then moved into breaking logical contradiction. The investigator listed numerous points where Lucas's statements conflicted with the evidence: intact snow with no footprints, unusual house light patterns, no recent opening-closing of the back door, the vehicle's route having no stops consistent with taking a drive to clear his head. All were presented calmly but relentlessly. Lucas began showing minor physical reactions, frequent swallowing, avoiding eye contact, occasionally clenching both hands together. At this stage, the interrogator introduced a pivotal point. Witness J.H. heard struggle sounds exactly when Elena's phone shut off. Lucas visibly startled. The team immediately noted this reaction as the second major fracture. When one investigator asked, "Do you want to explain that, or should we continue presenting more evidence?" Lucas broke his silence for the first time, blurting out, "I didn't mean to. I didn't want things to turn out like that. This was the decisive psychological turning point. The interrogators did not rush for a full confession, instead allowing Lucas to speak freely to avoid triggering defensiveness. He continued in a low voice, "We argued. She was really angry. I lost control of the situation." The team gently steered the questioning toward explaining behavior rather than direct accusation. "What caused you to lose control?" Lucas hesitated, then admitted they had a major argument in the bedroom. When asked directly, "Was there a physical struggle?" Lucas remained silent for a long moment, then gave a very small nod. The interrogator immediately reinforced with the forensic description of the wall dent and fabric fibers, showing not just a struggle, but significant impact. Lucas's hands trembled slightly, breathing became heavy, and he said, "I pushed her harder than I thought." This was recorded as a direct admission of violent conduct. The next interrogation tactic was closing the event loop, asking Lucas to describe what happened after the impact. He sat motionless for quite a while, then admitted that Elena fell down and didn't respond anymore. When asked why he didn't call for medical help, Lucas said everything happened too fast, and he panicked. The interrogator did not challenge the emotion, but focused on the actual sequence. "So what happened after she stopped responding?" Lucas bowed his head and admitted he decided to take her outside because he didn't know what else to do. At this point, the team introduced the VHS camera data, the figure dragging a long object. When asked, "Were you the person in the video?" Lucas closed his eyes for a few seconds, then said, "Yes." From here, the interrogation shifted to the final phase, locating the body. The investigator asked, "Where did you take Elena?" Lucas replied that he drove to a place where no one was and just wanted to hide everything as far away as possible. When asked for specifics, Lucas drew 3 intersecting directions in the air with his hand, saying he remembered an old logging road near a big lake. The team presented the Seaboys Lake GPS map printout. Lucas looked at it and pointed to an area near a logging road that the GPS had recorded, about 1 mile from the main road. The investigator asked for confirmation. "Is this where you left Elena?" Lucas hesitated, then said, "Yes. In the woods, on the south shore, there's an old mound." All responses were audio and video recorded and documented according to legal standards. When asked if Elena's body had been buried, Lucas confirmed he dug a shallow grave with a shovel he brought in the vehicle. The interrogators asked no further questions about motive or details of the killing at this point, to avoid disrupting the stable psychological rhythm, focusing solely on precise location. Lucas provided 2 additional orientation markers, a large broken pine tree and the lake surface visible when standing at the edge of the mound. The team recorded everything, marking it as sufficient elements to identify the outdoor scene location. At the conclusion of the session, Lucas formally signed the statement, admitting to a physical altercation that resulted in Elena's death and to transporting her body to the wooded area near Seaboys Lake. This represented a major turning point in the case, the first direct statement from the suspect in over 14 years, describing the events of the night Elena disappeared and the location where she was hidden. Immediately after Lucas Ward signed the confirmation of his statement regarding the location where the body was hidden in the forested area south of Seaboys Lake, the cold case unit promptly coordinated with the Maine State Police, the state forensic team, and the search and rescue unit to organize a comprehensive survey and excavation operation following the exact protocol for long-existing outdoor crime scenes. The area described by Lucas was located along an old logging road, approximately 400 meters from the lake shore. The terrain featured a gentle slope toward the water, dense forest interspersed with patches of damp soil, exposed tree roots, and a layer of accumulated leaf litter, nearly 14 years old. Due to the vast and difficult-to-access nature of the Seaboys Lake forest, the command team decided to deploy an advance team at 5 a.m. before heavy equipment arrived to mark the access route, identify the command post location, and assess soil stability at the reported site. Based on the GPS map data, extracted from the 2005 Lexus, and Lucas's description of an old mound under the shadow of a broken pine tree, the advanced team identified 3 suspect points, one of which matched the description most closely. At this point was an irregular mound, approximately 40–50 centimeters high, with the overlying organic layer differing from the surrounding area, thinner leaf litter, interrupted lichen patches, and several tree roots, showing signs of regrowth after disturbance many years earlier. This was considered a classic indicator of an old burial pit. The forensic team established the crime scene perimeter with stakes and colored tape, then divided the mound surface into a grid to record the precise location of any items discovered. The search team used ground-penetrating radar, GPR, for preliminary scanning. The radar returns revealed an oval-shaped anomaly at a depth of 40–60 centimeters, approximately 150 centimeters long and 55–60 centimeters wide, dimensions consistent with the shallow burial of an adult human body. After reporting to command, the GPR was run 3 additional times for confirmation. When all 3 scans produced similar results, the forensic team began manual excavation, avoiding large shovels or machinery to prevent damage to potential evidence. The topsoil layers were carefully removed using small trowels and soft brushes. At approximately 20 centimeters depth, investigators discovered a thin, decayed grayish fabric fragment that still retained some woven structure, suspected to match the type of material Elena typically wore in winter. The fabric was photographed, measured in place, and collected into a specialized paper evidence bag. Digging another 15 centimeters deeper, the forensic team began encountering skeletal structures. The proximal tibia and ribs were the first to appear. As the excavation area was expanded, an almost complete human skeleton gradually emerged. Forensic specialists used specialized tools to clean soil from the bones while documenting each exposed element to fully preserve positional context. The decomposition pattern was consistent with over 10 years. Dry, brittle bones with some smaller elements damaged by microorganisms. Notably, ribs 7 and 8 showed old fracture lines consistent with blunt force trauma, matching the injury suggested by the bedroom wall forensic analysis. While excavating the lower limbs and arms, the forensic team discovered another key piece of evidence, a small teardrop-shaped metal earring of the style Elena commonly wore. Though lightly oxidized, the shape remained identifiable. Not far away, in the soil layer adjacent to the mandible, the team found a small plastic fragment identified as part of a shattered 2005-era cell phone, corroborating Lucas's account that the phone was knocked to the floor during the altercation. When approximately 70% of the skeleton had been exposed, the forensic team located an additional button still attached to a fragment of wool fabric, further supporting initial identification. All evidence was documented with overall photos, close-ups, and scale references, then sealed in separate evidence bags. By around 3 p.m., the skeleton was fully liberated from the soil. The bones were placed on stainless steel trays and arranged according to anatomical order. On-site documentation recorded bone condition, fracture patterns, wear, and decomposition level for the comprehensive forensic report. A critical step was performed before removal. High-precision GPS equipment recorded the exact coordinates of the burial pit for the case file. Subsequently, soil samples were collected from different layers, leaf litter, brown soil, mottled soil, for later analysis in case foreign substances were present. Once the scene was fully documented, the skeleton and all evidence were placed in specialized transport containers, cushioned with protective foam, sealed with forensic evidence tape, and transported by special vehicle to the forensic lab in Augusta under the supervision of 2 investigators. The scene report noted that Lucas's disclosed location matched the recovery site exactly, and all physical evidence aligned with his described sequence of events, an extremely important factor in validating the confession and strengthening the chain of evidence. As the convoy left Seaboys Lake at the end of the day, The entire area was preserved in its current state for any potential further analysis, marking the conclusion of a tense but successful day of search and excavation that produced the first physical evidence after more than 14 years since Elena Ward's disappearance. After the skeleton and all evidence were transported to the forensic laboratory in Augusta, the examination team immediately began in-depth analysis to determine cause of death, identify perimortem and post-mortem injuries, and compare findings with the previously reconstructed 3D timeline model. Given the suspected violent nature of the case, forensic focus was placed on the neck region, particularly the hyoid bone, thyroid cartilage, and surrounding laryngeal structures, elements that most clearly indicate strangulation. The forensic team first arranged the entire skeleton in standard anatomical position, then examined the skull, ribs, and limb bones for cracks, fractures, or blunt force trauma. Upon reaching the neck, the forensic specialist immediately noted an abnormality. The hyoid bone was fractured at the right greater horn, with a sharp, clean break consistent with strong manual compression strangulation. Additionally, the left thyroid cartilage showed a small notch compatible with anterior compression. These findings were clearly described in the report: hyoid fracture with unilateral displacement, classic in cases of manual strangulation. The report also noted the discrepancy in decomposition levels between the hyoid and surrounding bones, indicating the injury occurred perimortem, not post-mortem from soil pressure or long-term environmental disturbance. Full-body evaluation confirmed the two previously noted rib fractures, consistent with blunt chest trauma, indirectly supporting the hypothesis of a struggle prior to death. Although soft tissue was absent, the fracture patterns and surfaces allowed determination of force direction, suggesting the victim was likely pinned or pressed against a hard surface during strangulation, consistent with the 3D simulation in the timeline reconstruction. After completing the detailed examination, the forensic lab issued the official cause of death report: homicidal strangulation, death due to manual strangulation by another person. This conclusion rested on 4 criteria: classic hyoid fracture, compatible thyroid cartilage injury, absence of self-inflicted indicators, and complete consistency with the bedroom wall force impact model. The report was then cross-referenced with the pre-existing 3D timeline model. When the hyoid injury was placed within the sequence, the reconstruction showed the highest probability time of death during the bedroom conflict phase, when forensic evidence had already established strong wall impact and witness-reported sounds of struggle. Notably, the hyoid fracture orientation matched the simulated force direction in the timeline, forward and slightly rightward, aligning with data showing the wall impact point in the right corner of the bedroom. Upon finalization, the forensic report delivered an unequivocal conclusion: Elena Ward did not die by accident, nor from environmental conditions, but from direct manual strangulation causing asphyxiation. This was the first scientific confirmation of the violent nature of the case and the final piece linking cause of death to the entire chain of evidence built throughout the reinvestigation. The forensic report was returned to the cold case unit for inclusion in the charging file, marking a major turning point in establishing the full truth of the Elena Ward case after nearly 14 years of silence. Immediately after the forensic laboratory finalized the cause of death report for Elena Ward as homicidal strangulation, the file was transferred directly to the Penobscot County District Attorney's Office to initiate criminal prosecution. With evidence strengthened by forensics, GPS, VHS camera footage, Lucas's statement, and the Seboys Lake excavation results, the district attorney formally charged 3 serious felonies: second-degree murder under Maine law, domestic context kidnapping, and obstruction of justice through intentional concealment of the crime and body disposal to impede investigation. Second-degree murder was applied based on Lucas using violence that resulted in death, even without evidence of premeditation. The act of strangulation was deemed sufficient to establish a high degree of intent to kill. The kidnapping charge arose from Lucas using force to render Elena unable to resist and removing her body from the residence without consent, satisfying the restraining a person with force element. The obstruction charge was supported by Lucas repairing the bedroom wall, hiding the body, discarding the phone, and concealing the entire sequence for many years. After establishing the charges, the DA's office worked with the cold case unit to build the complete legal case file, including the full 3D timeline, physical evidence chain, witness statements, crime scene photos, and GPS journey reconstruction. The prosecutor requested each section be presented as an independent evidence module to ensure that any individual part could stand on its own before a jury, crucial in cases lacking direct eyewitnesses. A standardized summary of conduct was prepared in the following structure: altercation sequence, mechanism of death, body disposal, transport to Ceboes Lake, scene concealment. This summary served for judicial proceedings and would be expanded in full detail at trial. Meanwhile, the investigation team assembled all preserved evidence: the skeleton, fabric fragments, earring, soil samples, GPR images, scene photographs, original GPS data, enhanced VHS video copy, and bedroom wall forensic analysis. All items were cataloged in the court's digital evidence inventory as required. The prosecutor also prepared the trial witness list: forensic pathologist, GPS specialist, excavation team members, 3D timeline investigator, and witness J.A. who heard the struggle sounds on the night of the incident. The list was sequenced to reconstruct the case in clear cause and effect order for the jury. Simultaneously, the DA's office prepared rebuttal analysis, anticipating possible defense arguments, such as challenges to VHS camera accuracy, degree of skeletal decomposition, or death by falling hypothesis. Each potential counter-argument was paired with counter-evidence. During file completion, the prosecutor requested additional visual aids from the cold case unit: bedroom impact point diagram, Lexus travel map, burial site, soil model, and full 14-year timeline chart. These materials would become key tools for presenting the case to a jury lacking investigative expertise, but required to assess overall persuasiveness. The final compiled file, case file, State First, Lucas Ward, contained over 600 pages of evidence, forensic reports, technical analyses, interrogation transcripts, and compressed 3D simulation video. The official file was submitted to the Bangor court, formally initiating prosecution of Lucas Ward on 3 charges, carrying the maximum penalties under current law. The trial of State First, Lucas Ward opened at Bangor court before a 12-member jury, beginning with the prosecution's opening statement, which systematically presented the entire 14-year chain of physical, technical, and forensic evidence according to the pre-prepared cause and effect structure. The prosecutor stated from the outset that the case rested not on speculation but on 4 pillars: unmanipulable technical data, excavated forensic evidence, Lucas's direct statements during interrogation, and the timeline model connecting every event on the night Elena Ward disappeared. After the jury was instructed on evidence evaluation standards, the prosecution began displaying the 3D timeline simulation video, starting from the last sighting of Elena in the home on the evening of December 14, 2005, followed by the 10:05 p.m. moment her phone ceased functioning. The simulation showed perfect alignment between the phone deactivation timestamp and witness J.H.'s report of struggle sounds, before transitioning to the bedroom wall forensic evidence: dent, floor scuff marks, and fabric fibers matching the victim's clothing. The prosecution called the forensic pathologist, who personally examined the hyoid and neck structures. The expert detailed the hyoid fracture line and explained in simple terms to the jury, this type of break does not occur from ordinary falls. It is classic for compression strangulation by human hands. The expert then presented the thyroid cartilage and rib fractures, correlating them with the force reenactment model, emphasizing that the injuries were perimortem and consistent with a violent struggle in a confined space. When asked whether the forensic conclusion aligned with the bedroom wall data, The expert affirmed high-degree match, creating a crucial highlight for the jury. Following the forensic presentation, the prosecution introduced technical evidence, the GPS data extracted from the 2005 Lexus system. A device analysis specialist testified that the journey data showed Lucas's vehicle leaving the home at 5:59 a.m. and traveling toward Sebois Lake, stopping along the logging road during a time frame matching his confession. The jury viewed a line plot map of the route, perfectly aligning with the investigation team's simulation. The prosecutor stressed there was no reasonable explanation for Lucas to be in that remote forest area the morning immediately following Elena's disappearance. Next, the prosecution played the enhanced VHS footage. The jury watched a figure dragging an elongated object across the backyard between 4:52 and 5:10 a.m. Although the image lacked sufficient clarity for facial identification, motion analysis experts testified that height, shoulder shape, and gait matched Lucas Ward. The prosecutor asked, based on the object's movement and apparent softness, was the dragged item consistent with the size of an adult human body? The expert answered, yes. All this data was consolidated into a unified evidence block. The prosecution then presented items recovered at Sebois Lake: the skeleton, wool fabric fragment, earring, plastic piece, identified as part of Elena's broken phone. Excavation scene photos were shown, displaying the burial pit, fractured ribs, earring location, and shallow grave arrangement. The excavation team members testified about soil conditions, old burial indicators, and careful manual recovery methods. When asked whether the recovery site matched Lucas's disclosed coordinates, the lead excavator confirmed complete match. The prosecution then addressed Lucas's interrogation statements, playing relevant audio-video segments, in which he admitted pushing Elena, admitted the altercation, and admitted transporting the body to the Sebois Lake area. Despite defense objections to playing extended video, the judge permitted segments directly related to the confession and burial location description. When the jury heard Lucas say, "I pushed her harder than I thought, and I took her somewhere no one would find her," the courtroom fell completely silent. After presenting the evidence, the prosecution delivered the closing argument, built around three pillars: 1. Forensic proof of strangulation death, 2. Behavioral evidence of motive, opportunity, and concealment actions by Lucas, 3. Technical data proving Lucas's movement timeline perfectly matched the crime sequence. The prosecutor explained that strangulation death could not coincide with Elena simply disappearing, nor result from domestic accident. Bedroom wall forensics proved a struggle that night. VHS camera confirmed an object dragged across the yard at dawn. GPS confirmed the journey to the remote burial site. Lucas's own words confirmed the entire behavioral line. The prosecutor concluded that in a case without direct eyewitnesses, the absolute consistency across independent sources, forensic, technical, confession, and physical evidence, formed an undeniable picture. Lucas Ward caused Elena's death, concealed the body, and obstructed justice for many years. Finally, the prosecutor emphasized, not a single link in this chain stands apart from the others. They are all connected like a machine, and that machine operates in only one direction toward conviction. With the argument reinforced by abundant evidence, the prosecution concluded its presentation, formally turning the trial over to the defense for argument, marking the pivotal moment leading to the jury's verdict. After the debate between the prosecution and the defense concluded, the judge officially handed the case file to the jury and instructed them to consider all evidence under the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt. The jury was escorted into a separate deliberation room, bringing with them the timeline charts, forensic photographs of the bedroom wall, the hyoid bone examination results, the GPS map to Sebois Lake, the enhanced VHS video, and the transcript of Lucas Ward's admission statement. The deliberation lasted more than 7 hours, during which jury members systematically discussed each group of evidence independently before considering them as a connected chain. The central questions focused on three main points: whether the medical evidence ruled out accidental death, whether the GPS and camera data had been misinterpreted, and whether Lucas's statement could be considered voluntary. When the forensic expert confirmed that this type of hyoid bone fracture is almost impossible to occur in a fall, the jury marked no reasonable doubt regarding cause of death. After the VHS video was reviewed 3 times under professional lighting analysis, they unanimously agreed that the object being dragged across the backyard could not be an ordinary item due to its length and distinctive movement. When the GPS timeline was cross-referenced with the topographic map, the jury noted no reasonable innocent explanation for Lucas's presence on the logging road that morning. Finally, upon reviewing the segment where Lucas admitted to the altercation, they noted that the statement was given after he had been read his Miranda warning, showed no signs of coercion, and therefore held full legal weight. After many hours of discussion, no juror requested to revisit the defense attorney's arguments or suggested additional verification. The final vote was conducted in secret, and the result was recorded in a sealed envelope delivered to the judge. 12/12 guilty votes on all 3 charges: second-degree murder, kidnapping, and obstruction of justice. The courtroom fell into absolute silence as the jury was called back in. The 4 persons stood and read the verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant Lucas Ward guilty of second-degree murder, guilty of kidnapping, and guilty of obstruction of justice. When the verdict was fully read, Lucas showed no strong reaction. He kept his gaze fixed downward on the table, hands tightly clasped in front of his chest. The prosecutor displayed no visible emotion, but the cold case unit representative present in court stood noticeably straighter, as if relieved of part of the burden they had carried for 14 years. After confirming the verdict, the judge proceeded to sentencing. For second-degree murder under Maine law, the maximum penalty is life imprisonment, and the judge emphasized that the nature of the case, strangulation of the victim, concealment of the body for many years, and staging of the scene to cover up the crime, placed it among the most serious offenses. The judge stated that Lucas's failure to come forward during the entire 14-year period, only admitting guilt when confronted with irrefutable evidence, demonstrated a lack of genuine remorse. The kidnapping charge was added under the state's sentencing structure, as moving the body out of the house and disposing of it in the deep forest after causing death was considered a continuation of the initial criminal conduct, further increasing the overall dangerousness of the offense. The obstruction of justice charge, though lesser, was viewed as conduct that seriously delayed the investigation and caused long-term harm to the victim's family. When aggregating all 3 charges, the judge pronounced life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, effective immediately. Lucas would be incarcerated at Maine State Prison with no eligibility for sentence reduction in any form. As the final sentence was read, the atmosphere in the courtroom became thick and heavy. The Ward family representatives shed tears but did not cheer. They remained silent, simply holding hands as a way of acknowledging that the truth had finally been brought to light after the longest period of their lives. On the investigative side, the cold case unit immediately filed to update the case status from unresolved missing adult to closed homicide case, conviction secured. With the sentence pronounced, the Elena Ward case was officially classified as a resolved homicide, concluding an investigation that spanned more than 14 years and affirming the value of the entire chain of technical, forensic, and testimonial evidence in bringing the perpetrator to justice. After the trial concluded and the life sentence without parole for Lucas Ward was handed down, the Maine State Police conducted a comprehensive operational review to examine the entire handling of the Elena Ward case from 2005 to 2019, with the goal of identifying weaknesses in missing persons investigation procedures and proposing improvements for the future. The review was carried out by an independent specialized team that included veteran investigators, forensic experts, data analysts, and representatives from the prosecutor's office. Initially, the team reviewed the 2005 file and determined that at the time of Elena's disappearance, procedures at Maine State Police and Bangor PD still relied heavily on subjective risk assessment, particularly in distinguishing between voluntary disappearance and suspicious disappearance. Because Elena was an adult with no known risk factors, the initial file was handled with minimal investigation and without deep forensic scene intervention. The report clearly stated that the bedroom wall, back door, and snow trails around the house should have been documented in detail on the very first night. Instead, they were only superficially checked because the law did not permit in-depth search without probable cause. The team recommended revising preliminary assessment procedures for missing adults, suggesting the adoption of a presumptive risk model within the first 24 hours to prevent the loss of time-sensitive evidence. Another serious deficiency identified was the failure to collect the VHS camera within the first week. In 2005, due to limited technology and an initial assessment that the case was not sufficiently serious, the investigative team only inquired with neighbors without seizing all tapes. The review team affirmed that, if the camera had been collected immediately, technical data could have shortened the investigation by many years. They recommended mandating the creation of a list of all exterior cameras within a 2-mile radius and securing the footage within 48 hours of receiving the report. Additionally, the review highlighted limitations in the analysis of personal electronic devices in 2005. Although Elena's phone stopped functioning at 10:05 p.m., this detail was not given corresponding importance in the timeline because there was no dedicated digital trace analysis team. Only in 2019 was this data re-examined and recognized as pivotal. Therefore, Maine State Police proposed establishing a digital first response unit, a team capable of analyzing devices from the earliest stage to identify critical signal loss timestamps. Regarding search operations, the review noted that expanding the search radius to 15 miles was correct procedure, but the lack of supporting tools such as GPR, positioning equipment, and human remains detection K9 units meant that the 2005-2006 search phase found no trace. GPR technology and 3D mapping were only applied during the reinvestigation, even though they are important tools that could have helped identify potential burial sites before time erased evidence. Furthermore, the team determined that the case was transferred to cold case status too early due to lack of resources and absence of a periodic review mechanism. To improve, they recommended establishing a 5-year cold case review cycle. Every 5 years, unresolved missing persons files must be reopened and reviewed with current technology. The review also emphasized the importance of vehicle GPS data, which was not considered a potential evidence source in 2005. They proposed that in missing persons cases involving personal vehicles, vehicle system data must be seized and analyzed immediately, regardless of whether the case has yet been classified as criminal. Finally, the review highlighted the role of confrontational interrogation tactics used in 2019, a technique not common in 2005. Training investigators in the use of technical data to break inconsistencies in statements was recommended for inclusion in mandatory training programs. The final report concluded that the Elena Ward case demonstrated remarkable progress in investigative technology and procedures over 14 years, while underscoring the need for continuous updating of missing persons investigation standards. Maine State Police accepted all recommendations and committed to improving procedures to ensure that the procedural blind spots of 2005 would not be repeated in future missing persons cases. When the Maine State Police operational review was completed, the entire Elena Ward case was viewed as a 14-year journey, a process of thawing a frozen file in which every stage, every piece of evidence, and every effort contributed to the final outcome. From the winter morning in 2005, when Elena was reported missing, through the initial fruitless search, to the transfer to cold case status, then to the turning point in 2016 with the abandoned storage unit and previously unseen evidence, everything revealed an investigation that was far from linear, full of gaps, disappointments, and prolonged helplessness. But it was precisely those gaps that highlighted the importance of modern forensics, tools that either did not exist or were not yet widespread when Elena disappeared. Digitizing VHS, enhancing images, recovering GPS from a 2005 vehicle, reconstructing a 3D timeline, and using GPR at the scene not only solved the case, but also proved that technology can recover pieces time seemed to have erased. The convergence of independent data points, from fabric fibers in the bedroom wall, hyoid fracture drag marks in the snow, to the GPS journey to Ciboas Lake, demonstrated that modern forensics is not merely a supplement to traditional investigation, but the foundation for reconstructing truth when there are no direct witnesses. The 14 years of the frozen file also underscored the role of persistence, from the cold case unit, the forensic team, the prosecutors, to the investigators who never gave up even when every stage seemed completely deadlocked. Finding Elena's body after more than a decade not only closed the legal file, but also returned the truth to the Ward family, who had waited for answers longer than anyone should ever have to. For the Maine community, the case carried deep meaning. It proved that even a long-stalled case, seemingly erased by time, can still be solved when re-examined with the right technology at the right moment. It reaffirmed that a cold case is not an ending, but only a temporary pause awaiting scientific advancement sufficient to bring the truth back to light. Systemically, the case prompted Maine State Police to change numerous procedures, updating investigative techniques, expanding camera collection, emphasizing electronic data, applying early scene forensics, and conducting periodic cold case reviews. These improvements are not merely lessons from the Elena Ward case, but will impact dozens of other missing persons files still waiting to be resolved. Ultimately, the case closed with a clear message. Time may be slow, but for the truth, time is not a barrier. It is only a test of technical capability, investigative persistence, and the determination of those who refuse to let a person's disappearance fade into oblivion. Elena Ward was brought home after 14 years, not in the way anyone hoped, but the truth about her fate was finally illuminated. And in that truth lies technology, forensics, continuously advancing investigative work. But above all, the belief that no cold case is truly cold, as long as people keep searching. The Elena Ward story reminds us of an important reality in contemporary American life. Personal safety and timely response to unusual signs should never be taken lightly. Elena disappeared in a single winter night, and her family immediately recognized something was wrong when her phone went off at 10:05 p.m. A small detail that later became a critical timeline anchor. In modern life, where busy routines make it easy to overlook warning signals, paying attention to details such as sudden loss of contact, failure to appear according to regular schedule, or leaving all personal belongings behind, is a practical lesson everyone should remember. Another noteworthy detail is the old VHS camera belonging to a neighbor that became crucial evidence after more than 10 years. This points to a major lesson for communities across the United States. Preserving and sharing data when suspicion arises can save an investigation. Many cases in America have been solved thanks to home security cameras, doorbell cameras, or small footage that homeowners thought was nothing special. Similarly, the storage unit owner reported the abandoned unit, leading to the discovery of Elena's old box of belongings. An apparently small action that opened an entirely new phase of investigation. Finally, the most important point: persistence. The cold case unit never gave up, despite the file being frozen for 14 years. In American society, where thousands of people go missing each year, this story reminds us that hope and effort are never wasted. Technology changes, forensics advances, and truth can be found even after a very long time, as long as people do not give up. If you are interested in these determined journeys of solving cases like the Elena Ward case, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the stories of truth unraveled after years of deadlock. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video, where we continue to seek answers to the mysteries that remain unsolved.